Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The forest was alive, but not in the way I had always imagined. The trees didn't whisper, they groaned. The wind didn't sing, it howled, carrying with it a chorus of sounds that set my nerves on edge. My flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating jagged branches that clawed at the air like skeletal fingers. I'd been walking for hours, or was it days? Time had dissolved into an endless stretch of fear and fatigue. It started innocently enough, a weekend camping trip with friends. We'd laughed around the fire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories that were supposed to be scary but felt harmless in the warm glow of the flames. I'd woken up early the next morning, eager to explore the trails before anyone else stirred. It was supposed to be a quick walk. I hadn't even brought my phone, thinking I'd be back before anyone noticed I was gone. But the trail twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember. The trees grew denser, their gnarled roots snaking across the ground like traps waiting to ensnare me. I told myself I wasn't lost. Not yet. I just needed to find a marker, a clearing, something familiar. Instead, I found shadows that deepened with every step. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving me in a world painted in shades of black and gray. Panic bubbled in my chest, but I forced it down. I needed to think, to focus. I had my flashlight, a small water bottle, and a granola bar. Not much, but enough to keep me going until morning. Or so I thought. The first night was the worst. At least, that's what I told myself. I found a hollow beneath a massive oak tree and curled up, trying to ignore the sounds of the forest. Twigs snapped in the distance, and leaves rustled as if something unseen was moving just beyond the edge of my vision. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. The second day brought no relief. I wandered aimlessly, my legs aching and my throat dry. The forest seemed to shift around me, paths disappearing as soon as I turned my back. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, casting everything in an eerie twilight. And then there were the carvings. I almost missed the first one, a crude symbol etched into the bark of a tree. It looked like a circle with jagged lines radiating from it, like a sun drawn by a child. At first, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was a marker left by hikers. But as I found more of them, each one more intricate than the last, that hope curdled into dread. The symbols weren't random. They formed a pattern, leading me deeper into the woods. By the third night, I was too tired to care where I slept. I collapsed beneath another tree, my body trembling with exhaustion. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was close, too close. My flashlight flickered as I scrambled to my feet, the beam dancing wildly across the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, a shadow within the shadows. But when I swung the light back, there was nothing there. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I kept walking, my legs moving on autopilot. The forest felt alive, its heartbeat thrumming beneath my feet. The symbols grew more frequent, their designs more elaborate. Some of them were carved into the ground, forming spirals that made my head spin if I looked at them too long. Others were painted in a dark, sticky substance that I didn't dare touch. On the fourth day, I found the cabin. It was small and weathered, its wooden walls covered in moss. The windows were broken, and the door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I should have turned around, but I was desperate for shelter, for some sign of humanity. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, my flashlight revealing a single room filled with broken furniture and scattered papers. The walls were covered in the same symbols I'd seen in the forest, but these were different. They felt deliberate, like they were telling a story I couldn't understand. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting erratic. The entries spoke of the forest, of something ancient and hungry that lived within it. The last entry read, "It watches. It waits. Don't let it find you." I dropped the journal and ran. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing closer together. My flashlight died, plunging me into darkness. I stumbled blindly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sounds were louder now, the guttural growls and snapping branches following me no matter how fast I ran. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, its silhouette impossibly tall and thin. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the night. I froze, my body refusing to move as it tilted its head, as if studying me. When it took a step forward, I finally found my voice and screamed. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling onto a road, a pair of headlights blinding me. A car screeched to a halt, and a man jumped out, his face a mask of concern. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was point toward the forest, my hands shaking. They never found the cabin, or the journal. The forest, they said, didn't match my description. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night, I hear those guttural sounds again, echoing in the back of my mind. The forest didn't let me go. It's still watching, still waiting. Weeks passed, but the nightmares didn't. Every night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of snapping branches echoing in my ears. I tried to move on, to convince myself it was over. But the forest wasn't done with me. It started with the symbols. They appeared on the walls of my apartment, faint at first, like smudges of dirt. I scrubbed them away, but they always came back, darker and more defined. Then came the whispers, low and guttural, seeping through the cracks in the walls. I barely slept, my exhaustion mounting with each passing day. And then the dreams began. In them, I was back in the forest, the symbols glowing faintly as they guided me deeper into the darkness. The figure was always there, watching, waiting. When I woke, I'd find dirt under my nails and leaves in my hair, as if I'd been sleepwalking. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. The paper was old and yellowed, the handwriting jagged and frantic. It read, "You have to go back. It won't stop until you do." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew it was true. The forest had marked me, claimed me. I couldn't escape it. So, with a heavy heart, I packed a bag and drove back to the edge of the woods. The air was heavy as I stepped into the forest, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. The symbols were everywhere now, carved into the trees and painted on the ground. They seemed to pulse with a faint light, guiding me deeper. I followed them, my fear mounting with every step. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost all meaning as the forest closed in around me. The guttural sounds grew louder, closer. And then I saw it, the cabin. It looked exactly as I remembered, its door hanging open like a gaping maw. I stepped inside, the air thick with decay. The journal was still there, open to the last page. But this time, there was more. A single line scrawled beneath the final entry. "Welcome home." The door slammed shut behind me, and the guttural sounds filled the air, deafening and all-encompassing. The walls seemed to close in, the symbols glowing brighter until they burned into my vision. The last thing I saw was the figure, its ember eyes burning with a terrible hunger as it reached for me. I don't know how I escaped. One moment, the figure's ember eyes burned into mine, and the next, I was running, my legs moving as if propelled by some unseen force. The cabin was gone, replaced by the endless expanse of trees. The guttural sounds followed me, growing fainter with each step until they were swallowed by silence. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I was clutching something in my hand. It was the journal, though I didn't remember grabbing it. The pages were different now, filled with new entries and sketches of the symbols. One page caught my eye, a detailed drawing of the figure, its ember eyes staring out from the paper. Beneath it was a single word, weakness. The following pages were filled with fragmented notes, hints about the creature's origin. It spoke of a ritual, a way to sever its connection to the forest. The instructions were incomplete, but one thing was clear. I needed to find the source of its power, a place deep within the woods marked by the largest of the symbols. I didn't want to go back, but the forest wouldn't let me rest. The symbols appeared everywhere, on the walls of buildings, on the pavement beneath my feet, even etched into my skin like faint scars. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The journal's pages seemed to shift and change, revealing new clues each time I opened it. I gathered supplies, determined to end this once and for all. A map from the journal hinted at a clearing surrounded by trees marked with the glowing symbols. It would be there. The notes said that the creature's hold could be broken. But the warnings were clear. The ritual would come at a cost. As I stepped back into the forest, the air grew heavier, the symbols brighter. The guttural sounds began again, closer than ever. But this time I wasn't running. This time, I was hunting. The trees loomed over me, their twisted branches reaching out like hands desperate to pull me back. The forest had never felt more alive or more malevolent. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, the kind that settles in just before something terrible happens. I could feel the creature's presence, a constant weight pressing on my chest, suffocating me. It was here. It was always here. I followed the map, though the path it indicated seemed to shift and change with every step. The symbols were everywhere now, glowing faintly in the darkness, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my racing heart. Each step felt heavier, as though the forest itself was trying to drag me down, to swallow me whole. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I had to finish this. The clearing was ahead, just as the journal had described. It was a place untouched by time, a space where the trees seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways, forming a ring around a central point. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone, covered in the same symbols that had haunted me for so long. It was carved into the earth itself, ancient and worn, but still pulsing with an energy that made my skin crawl. I knelt before the stone, my fingers trembling as I traced the symbols etched into its surface. The journal had said the ritual was simple, but it came with a cost. I didn't know what that cost would be, but I was willing to face it. I had no choice. The creature would never let me go. It would never stop hunting me. As I began to speak the words from the journal, the ground beneath me trembled. The air crackled with a low hum, and the symbols on the stone began to glow brighter, burning with an intensity that made my eyes water. The whispers grew louder, now almost a scream, as if the forest itself was in pain. And then, from the shadows, I saw it. The figure. It was taller than I remembered, its limbs impossibly long, its body a twisted mass of shadow and bone. Its ember eyes burned with an insatiable hunger, and its mouth stretched wide in a grotesque grin. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each step toward me. I could feel its gaze like a physical force, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I didn't stop the chant. My voice was hoarse, but I pushed through, forcing the words from my throat. The air around me grew colder, the forest seeming to close in tighter. The figure was getting closer, its presence overwhelming. I had to finish. I had to stop it. And then, just as I thought I couldn't go any further, the stone in front of me cracked. A deep, resonant sound that shook the very ground beneath me. The symbols on the stone flared with blinding light, and the forest screamed. The creature let out a deafening roar, its ember eyes flashing with rage. It lunged at me, its limbs stretching unnaturally, but before it could reach me, the ground split open, and a wave of energy erupted from the stone. The creature screamed, its form writhing and twisting as the energy consumed it, pulling it back into the earth. The forest trembled, the trees shaking as if in agony, and then silence. For a moment, I couldn't move. The air was thick with the scent of burning leaves, and the ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it could collapse at any moment. But the creature was gone. The whispers had stopped. The symbols had faded. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. The journal lay beside me, its pages now blank, as if the creature's influence had been erased from the world entirely. But I knew better. The forest had not forgotten me. It never would. I stood, my body trembling, and turned to leave. The forest had given me a moment of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. The creature was gone, but its mark was still on me. The symbols would haunt me forever, etched into my skin, into my mind. I could never truly escape. As I walked back through the trees, I heard it again, the guttural growl, faint but unmistakable. The forest wasn't finished with me. It was still watching, still waiting, and one day, it would come for me again. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, its trees now looming like silent sentinels. Despite the victory I had claimed over the creature, there was no sense of relief. The weight of the forest gaze followed me, pressing in from all sides, as if it had been waiting for me to slip, to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ritual had only been a temporary reprieve, a fragile barrier that wouldn't hold for long. I stumbled through the woods, my legs heavy and my mind clouded with exhaustion. The journal was still clutched tightly in my hand, its pages now eerily blank, as though the forest had erased the very memory of the creature. But I knew better. The journal wasn't finished with me either. It had been a guide, a map, a record of the forest's twisted history. But it was also a curse. Every time I looked at it, I felt its pull, a dark force that threatened to drag me back into the depths of the woods. The symbols were fading, yes, but they weren't gone. They were etched into my mind, burned into my very soul. They pulsed with a faint, insistent rhythm, and I could feel them in the air around me, beneath my skin. They were everywhere, on the trees, on the ground, in the sky itself. They followed me like a shadow, like a curse that I could never outrun. I kept walking, my steps mechanical, driven by some force I couldn't name. The path seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees never changing, the air never shifting. Time had become meaningless in the forest. How long had I been walking? Hours? Days? I couldn't tell. It felt like I had been lost in this nightmare for a lifetime. And then I saw it, the clearing. It wasn't the same clearing I had visited before. This one was different, twisted in ways that I couldn't fully comprehend. The stone was still there, but it was cracked, broken, as if something had shattered it from the inside out. The symbols were gone, replaced by something darker, more insidious. A new design, more intricate and sinister than the ones I had seen before, was carved into the ground. It pulsed with a sickly light, a rhythmic throb that echoed in my chest. I didn't want to go closer. I wanted to turn around, to run, to leave this cursed place behind me. But I couldn't. My feet moved of their own accord, drawn toward the center of the clearing. The air grew thick with an unnatural heat, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift, as though it was alive, breathing. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, like the rustling of leaves in the dead of night. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a voice, one I knew all too well. You can't escape. The words were like a cold hand gripping my heart, and I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, but there was nothing, no figure, no creature, just the empty clearing, the broken stone, and the pulsing symbols. It's never over. The voice was closer now, almost inside my head. I could feel it pressing against my skull, twisting my thoughts. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped, frozen in place, the forest closing in around me. And then I saw it. Not the creature, but something worse. The ground cracked open beneath me, and from the depths of the earth, something began to rise. At first, it was just a shadow, a vague shape that shifted and twisted in the darkness. But as it rose, it took form. A figure, tall and thin, its limbs elongated and grotesque, its body covered in writhing tendrils. Its eyes were the same ember glow I had seen before, but now they were endless, a sea of fire that burned with an unholy hunger. It was the forest itself. The creature had never been separate from the woods. It was the woods, the darkness that had always lingered just beyond the trees, the hunger that pulsed beneath the earth. The forest had been waiting for me to return, for the ritual to fail, for the mark to be passed on. I could feel it now, the connection between us, The symbols on my skin burned, as if they were alive, feeding off my fear. The forest was alive, and it was feeding on me. The figure moved closer, its tendrils reaching out toward me, and I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The ritual had failed. The forest had claimed me. I had never been free. The creature had never been defeated. It had only been waiting for the right moment for me to return to feed. And now it would take me body and soul. But as the tendrils wrapped around me, pulling me toward the figure, I heard something. A voice, not the creature's, but something different. Something familiar. You're not alone. I struggled, fighting against the pull, against the weight of the forest. And then, from the darkness, a figure appeared. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but his presence was unmistakable. He stepped into the clearing, and the air shifted, the symbols on the ground flickering as if they were alive, reacting to his presence. The figure stopped, and for a moment everything was still. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something. The man spoke, his voice low and steady. You've been marked just like me, but you don't have to let it take you. Not yet. I didn't understand. Who was he? What did he mean? He reached out, his hand brushing against the tendrils that held me, and they recoiled, as if they were afraid of him. The man turned to me, his eyes glowing faintly, the same ember glow as the creature, but tempered, controlled. We have a choice, he said. The forest is not just a prison. It's a weapon, and together, we can destroy it. I didn't know if I could trust him, but in that moment, I had no choice. The forest was closing in, its hunger insatiable, and the figure was reaching for me once more. I had to act. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. How? The man's lips curled into a faint smile. We burn it down. And with that, the forest grip tightened, and I realized that this was only the beginning. The creature had been just the first trial. The true battle, the one that would decide my fate, was yet to come. The air in the clearing thickened, a heavy, suffocating pressure that seemed to press against my chest. The forest hummed with anticipation, its pulse echoing through the ground beneath my feet. The figure, this strange man, stood before me, his presence as solid and unyielding as the ancient trees surrounding us. His ember eyes glowed faintly, like coals smoldering in the dark, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as he looked at me, his expression unreadable. Burn it down. The words hung in the air, charged with an energy I couldn't fully comprehend. How could we destroy something so vast, so alive? The forest stretched out in every direction, an endless labyrinth of shadows and whispers. It wasn't just a place, it was a living, breathing entity of force that had marked me, claimed me. How could we fight something that had existed for centuries, if not longer? But as the man's gaze met mine, something inside me stirred, a flicker of hope. The creature had been a manifestation of the forest's hunger, its darkness, but it was only a part of the whole. The forest itself was the true enemy, the true source of the terror that had haunted me for so long. And if the man was right, if we could fight back, maybe there was a way to finally end this. He stepped forward, his movements fluid, almost otherworldly, as though he was one with the forest itself. He raised his hand, and the ground trembled beneath us. The symbols on the earth flickered, their faint glow intensifying, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. We need to sever its connection to the land, he said, his voice low and steady. The ritual you performed, it was a start, but it wasn't enough. The forest power is tied to something older, deeper. We have to find the heart of it, the source. I nodded, though I didn't fully understand. The man had spoken with such certainty, and there was a fire in his eyes that made me believe he knew what he was doing. I had no choice but to follow. He gestured toward the trees, and the symbols began to pulse in time with the thudding of my own heart. The heart of the forest lies deeper than we've gone before, beyond the clearing, but we won't make it there without a fight. The forest will do everything it can to stop us. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, but I knew what had to be done. We had to go deeper. The creature, the forest, the darkness, it had to be stopped. I had been marked, haunted, and hunted for too long. It was time to end it. The man turned to face me fully, his expression softening for the first time. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question settle into my bones. There was no turning back now. The forest had already taken too much, and if I didn't do something, it would keep taking until nothing was left. "I'm ready." Without another word, the man led the way, his footsteps sure and steady. The forest around us seemed to shift, the trees bending and groaning as we moved deeper into its heart. The symbols on the ground began to glow brighter, their light flickering like dying embers. It was as if the forest itself was trying to push us back, to prevent us from reaching whatever lay ahead. As we walked, the guttural growls from before returned, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. The whispers filled the air again, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all directions, clawing at my mind, urging me to turn back. But I didn't. I couldn't. The man was ahead of me, his form a shadow in the growing darkness, and I followed, every step heavier than the last. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew taller, their bark twisted and gnarled, their roots snaking across the ground like the fingers of some ancient, sleeping creature. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath our feet was soft, like wet earth, as if the very earth was alive, shifting with every step. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take another step, we reached it. The heart of the forest. It was a massive, twisted tree, its trunk blackened and gnarled, its roots stretching deep into the earth like veins. The tree seemed to pulse with a dark energy, its branches reaching up toward the sky, as if trying to escape the earth's grip. The air around it was thick with the same oppressive energy that had suffocated me since I first entered the woods. It was the source, the heart of the forest's power. The creature had been its servant, a manifestation of its hunger, but this was the true heart of the darkness. The man stepped forward, his eyes locked on the tree. "This is it. This is what we have to destroy." I could feel the weight of his words, the finality in them. This was the source of everything. The creature, the symbols, the whispers, it all led here. And if we didn't destroy it, the forest would never let us go. I took a step forward, but before I could get any closer, the ground beneath us cracked. A low, rumbling growl filled the air, and the tree seemed to come alive, its branches thrashing in the wind, its roots writhing beneath the earth. The forest had sensed our presence, and it was fighting back. The man turned to me, his face grim. "We have to act fast. If we don't sever its connection now, it will consume us." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We had no choice. This was it, the final battle. Together, we stepped forward, the man raising his hand to the tree. The symbols on the ground began to glow again, brighter than ever before, their light pulsing in time with the beat of my heart. The air around us crackled with energy, and the forest seemed to scream, a deafening roar that filled the very earth beneath our feet. And then, with a single, decisive motion, the man thrust his hand into the tree's trunk. The world exploded. The ground shook violently, and the sky above us darkened, as if the very heavens were being torn apart. The tree groaned, its bark splintering and cracking as though it were being ripped from the earth. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood, and the ground beneath our feet trembled, threatening to swallow us whole. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. The forest was fighting, but we were fighting back. And in that moment, I knew this was the end. One way or another, it would end here, with a final, deafening roar. The tree shattered, its roots breaking free from the earth, its branches falling to the ground in a twisted heap. The symbols on the ground flickered, their glow fading, and the whispers fell silent. The forest was still. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air was clear. But as the man pulled his hand from the tree, I saw it. The ember eyes. They were still there, burning with hunger. The creature had never left. It had only been waiting, and now it was coming for us both. The air around us seemed to thicken again, the oppressive weight returning as the ember eyes burned brighter, more intense. They were no longer a distant, fleeting presence. They were here, with us. The forest, the creature, its hunger. It had never truly been severed. The tree was gone, but its power had simply shifted, morphing into something darker, more insidious. The man beside me didn't flinch, though his face was grim, his jaw clenched tight. His hand was still outstretched, the faintest tremor running through his fingers as he tried to focus, to hold whatever power he had summoned. But the creature was relentless. Its presence was suffocating, a cold that seeped into my bones, into my very soul. "We can't fight it like this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "It's not just the forest. It's something older, something that's been here long before we arrived." I didn't understand, not fully, but I didn't need to. I could feel it now, the gnawing sense of inevitability. The creature was here to claim us, to drag us back into the depths of the forest where its roots ran deeper than any of us could fathom. It had waited, it had watched, and now it was ready to feast. The ground beneath us trembled again, this time with more force, as if the earth itself was alive and writhing. The trees around us began to groan, their trunks cracking, as if they were bending to the will of something far more powerful than any of us could comprehend. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, but it wasn't wind. It was the sound of something moving through the trees, something that had been born from the forest's heart, from the very darkness that had consumed it. The man's eyes flickered toward me, his expression hardening with resolve. "You have to finish what you started. The ritual. You have the power to sever it, to destroy it. It's in the journal. You've seen it." I didn't need him to say more. I knew what he meant. The journal, the one I had found so many days ago, the one I had carried with me, never fully understanding its significance. The pages had been filled with symbols, with warnings, but now I understood. The ritual had been incomplete, but I had the final piece. I could feel it deep inside me, a sense of purpose that had been growing ever since I stepped into the forest, ever since I had first seen those glowing symbols. But I wasn't sure I was strong enough. The creature was close now. I could feel its presence in the air, pressing down on me like a weight. The whispers were back, louder than ever, clawing at my mind, urging me to turn and run. But there was no escape. Not anymore. "Do it," the man urged, his voice tight with desperation. "Do it before it's too late." I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I pulled the journal from my bag, flipping through the pages until I found the final, incomplete ritual. The symbols on the page seemed to dance before my eyes, their shapes shifting and twisting as if they were alive. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. This was it, the last chance. I began to speak the words, the ancient language written in the journal. The words felt foreign on my tongue, heavy and strange, but I kept going. The ground beneath me shook harder, the trees bending in unnatural ways, as if the forest itself was resisting. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it win. As I spoke the final words, the air around us crackled, the energy thick and charged. The ember eyes flared, their glow blinding, and the creature's form began to materialize from the shadows, its twisted figure emerging from the darkness like a nightmare made flesh. Its body was long and sinewy, its limbs impossibly thin, its face a blur of shadows and sharp, jagged features. But its eyes were the only thing that remained clear, burning with a terrible hunger. I could feel the power of the ritual building, the symbols on the ground glowing brighter, pulsing in time with my words. The creature screeched, a sound that rattled my bones, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The forest was screaming, the trees groaning as if they were alive and in pain, but I didn't stop. And then, with one final, deafening roar, the creature lunged. I raised my hands, my voice rising in a final crescendo. The symbols on the ground erupted in light, blinding and intense, and the creature froze, its ember eyes widening in shock. It screeched again, this time in pain, its form flickering like a dying flame. The forest shook with the force of the ritual, the ground cracking beneath us as the very air seemed to warp and distort. And then, with a final, gut-wrenching scream, the creature collapsed. The forest fell silent. For a moment, I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was still, the oppressive weight lifted. The ground beneath my feet no longer trembled. The trees no longer groaned. The creature was gone. The forest was still. I turned to the man beside me, but he was gone. His figure had vanished into the shadows, as if he had never been there at all. Had he been real? Had he been a part of the forest's twisted power, a remnant of its dark force? I didn't know. I didn't care. The forest was silent now, the symbols fading from the ground. The air was clear, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. The weight had been lifted. The nightmare was over. But even as I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something in the distance, just beyond the trees, waiting. The amber eyes, I thought. They were still out there. The forest had been quiet before, but I knew better now. It was never truly gone. The silence stretched, heavy and unnerving. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my breath still shallow, my body trembling from the exertion of the ritual. The forest around me was eerily still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows, its ember eyes burning through the darkness. But there was nothing. The air was clear, the trees no longer seemed to groan, and the ground no longer trembled beneath my feet. I took a cautious step forward, then another, and another, until I was walking through the forest, unsure of where I was going, but driven by an overwhelming need to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me, that the very trees were aware of my presence, following my every movement. It was like I was still a part of it, like it was still connected to me in some way. The symbols were gone from the ground, but I could still see them in my mind's eye, etched into the very fabric of the forest. They had been there long before I arrived, and they would be there long after I left. I had severed the creature's hold, but I had not freed the forest. It was still alive, still hungry, still waiting. As I pushed through the underbrush, my thoughts turned to the journal. The pages had shifted, the symbols had changed, but the final entry, the one I had seen before, had stayed the same. Welcome home. It had been a warning, a reminder that the forest never truly let go. It had claimed me once, and it would never forget. I had thought that by completing the ritual, I could escape, that by severing the creature's connection to the forest, I could break free of its influence. But the forest had always been more than just the creature. It was the land, the trees, the very earth beneath my feet. It was ancient, older than anything I could understand, and I had only scratched the surface. The trees began to close in around me, the branches reaching out like long, twisted fingers, their leaves rustling in the wind. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, the presence, the weight of something watching me, something ancient and powerful, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of the forest. It was waiting, and I knew, deep down, that it would never let me go. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees growing thicker, the shadows darker. The whispers began again, faint at first, but growing louder with each step I took. They were soft at first, like a murmur in the wind, but then they grew clearer, more insistent. Words not in any language I knew, but still familiar, as if they were calling me, urging me to listen. I tried to block them out, to ignore the growing sense of dread that was creeping up my spine. I had to keep moving. I had to leave, but the forest seemed to shift around me, the path twisting and turning, leading me deeper into the heart of the woods. And then I saw it, the clearing. It wasn't the same one I had seen before, but it was close enough. The symbols were back, glowing faintly in the moonlight, etched into the ground like a map, leading me forward. The air was thick with the same oppressive weight I had felt before, and the guttural growls echoed through the trees, distant but unmistakable. And there, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the figure. It was taller now, its limbs longer, more twisted. Its ember eyes burned with an intensity that felt like they were searing through my soul. It tilted its head, as if studying me, its form flickering in and out of the shadows, like it was not entirely bound to this world. I froze, unable to move, unable to look away. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging me to turn and run. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I was trapped in its gaze, in its hunger. The figure stepped forward, its long, skeletal limbs moving with unnatural grace. It was no longer just a shadow, no longer just a presence. It was real, tangible, and it was coming for me. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, my mind racing. The ritual had not worked. The creature had not been destroyed. It had been banished, yes, but only for a time. The forest had always been its home, its source of power. And now it was back, stronger than ever. I had to finish what I started. The journal, the ritual, the clearing. It was all connected. I had thought I was free, but I had been wrong. The creature was not just a manifestation of the forest darkness. It was a part of it, and as long as the forest stood, it would never truly be gone. The figure took another step forward, its ember eyes locked onto mine, its presence overwhelming. I could feel the hunger radiating from it, the insatiable desire to consume, to drag me back into the depths of the forest where I would be lost forever. But this time, I wasn't afraid. This time I knew what I had to do. I reached into my bag, my hands trembling as I pulled out the journal. The pages were still shifting, still changing, but I could see the symbols now. They were clear, etched into the paper like they had always been there, waiting for me to understand. The ritual wasn't over. It had only just begun. I opened the journal to the final page, the one that had haunted me from the beginning. The one with the word, weakness. It wasn't a warning. It was the key. The creature's ember eyes flickered as I began to speak, the words coming easier this time, flowing from my mouth like they had always been there. The symbols on the ground began to glow brighter, the air crackling with energy as the forest itself seemed to respond. The figure screeched, its form flickering, its ember eyes dimming as the ritual took hold. The trees groaned, the ground trembled, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else. The creature's form began to dissolve, its body twisting and writhing as the ritual reached its climax. And then, with a final, deafening roar, it was gone. The clearing fell silent once more. I stood there, panting, my body trembling from the strain of the ritual. The forest around me was still, the symbols fading from the ground, the oppressive weight lifting. The creature was gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. But as I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Something in the distance, just beyond the trees. Something that would never truly let me go. The forest had claimed me once, and I knew, deep down, that it would always be a part of me. It was never truly over. I took a tentative step back, my eyes scanning the forest, half expecting to see the creature's ember eyes flickering in the distance. The silence felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that the ritual had worked, that the forest was finally free of its grasp. But the nagging feeling at the back of my mind told me otherwise. I glanced down at the journal, now closed in my hands. The pages felt heavier than before, as if the weight of what had just transpired was pressing down on them. I opened it one last time, my fingers trembling as I turned to the last page. The word weakness was still there, but something had changed. Beneath it, in the same jagged, frantic handwriting, were new words. It waits. It always waits, and it will never let you leave. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, the familiar trees now seeming more menacing, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. The forest had always been alive, but now it felt different, darker, more aware. The ritual had severed the creature's hold, but had it truly freed me? Or had I merely given it a new way to watch? To wait? I started walking, my legs heavy, each step dragging me deeper into the forest. The path that had once been clear now seemed to shift with every glance. The symbols, once fading, began to reappear in the corners of my vision, scrawled into the bark of trees, etched into the dirt beneath my feet. The whispers returned, softer this time, but no less insistent. They were everywhere, in the rustling of leaves, in the groaning of the trees, in the wind that tugged at my clothes. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. The forest was still watching, still waiting, and the creature, though gone for now, was not finished with me. It had marked me, claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always find a way to drag me back. I quickened my pace, but the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees, once mere silhouettes in the distance, now towered over me, their bark slick with something dark and wet. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was alive, pulsing with a rhythm I couldn't understand. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could hear the faintest rustling, like something moving just out of sight. I reached for my flashlight, but my hands were shaking too violently to hold it steady. The beam flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the trees. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled forward, desperate to find an escape, to break free of this nightmare. And then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the trees. Tall, thin, its silhouette almost indistinguishable from the darkness around it. Its eyes, those ember eyes, glowed faintly, like dying embers in a dying fire. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. The whispers grew louder, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. The figure tilted its head, its gaze never leaving mine, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it was waiting for me to make the next move. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. I could only stand there, trapped in its gaze, as the forest closed in around me. The symbols were everywhere now, glowing faintly in the darkness, guiding me forward. I had no choice but to follow. I don't know how much time passed. Minutes? Hours? Days? Time had no meaning here, in the heart of the forest, where the trees whispered and the shadows moved. I stumbled through the underbrush, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The figure followed, always just out of reach, its ember eyes never leaving me. Finally, I reached a clearing. It was small, almost suffocating in its isolation. The ground was bare, save for a few scattered leaves and a single stone in the center. The stone was carved with symbols, familiar symbols, the same ones that had haunted me since the beginning. They glowed faintly, pulsing with an energy that made my skin crawl. The figure stepped forward, its tall form looming over me. It was so close now. I could feel the heat from its eyes, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. It was no longer a shadow, no longer a mere presence. It was real, tangible, and it was waiting. I knew what I had to do. The journal had given me the clues, the rituals, the warnings. I had thought I could escape, but I had been wrong. The forest had never let me go. It had always been a part of me, and I was a part of it. The figure raised its hand, its long, twisted fingers reaching toward me. I didn't resist. I couldn't. I had no choice but to accept what it was offering. The ritual wasn't over. It had only just begun. I closed my eyes and whispered the words from the journal, the ones I had memorized in my desperation. The symbols on the stone began to glow brighter, and the air crackled with energy. The ground beneath me trembled, and the whispers grew louder, their voices rising in a cacophony of sound. The figure stepped closer, its ember eyes burning with a hunger I could feel deep in my chest. It was here at last to claim me fully, and I knew, as I stood there in the center of the clearing, that the forest would never let me go. Not now, not ever. The ritual had begun again, and this time there was no escaping. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the entire forest had paused, holding its breath. The symbols on the stone pulsed with an eerie light, brighter now, as if they were feeding off the growing tension in the clearing. I could feel the power in the air, a tangible force that made my skin crawl and my pulse race. The figure stepped closer, its long, skeletal fingers reaching for me. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. The whispers, now louder and clearer, echoed in my mind, urging me to finish what I had started. They were the forest's voice, the creature's voice, and my own voice, Every step I had taken had led me to this moment. I had thought I was free. I had thought that by severing the creature's hold, by completing the ritual, I could escape its grasp. But I had been wrong. The forest had never been just about the creature. It was a living thing, a force of nature older than anything I could understand, and I was a part of it now. The figure, the creature, was just one manifestation of its hunger, its need to claim and consume. I closed my eyes, the words from the journal repeating in my mind like a chant, a prayer I didn't fully understand but knew I had to speak. The symbols on the stone began to shift, their patterns changing with every word I uttered. The air hummed with energy, vibrating in my chest, and the ground beneath me trembled as though the earth itself was waking up. The figure loomed in front of me now, its ember eyes glowing brighter, casting an eerie light over the clearing. It was no longer just a shadow, no longer just a presence. It was real, tangible, and it was waiting for me to make the final move. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the stone. The moment my fingers made contact, a wave of energy shot through me, searing my skin, my bones, my very soul. The symbols flared to life, the light blinding, and the whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices that drowned out everything else. I could feel the creature's hunger, its insatiable desire to consume, to drag me back into the depths of the forest where I would be lost forever. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come this far, and I knew what I had to do. With a final, desperate breath, I spoke the last word, the one that would complete the ritual. The moment the word left my lips, the forest seemed to explode. The trees groaned, the ground cracked, and the sky above seemed to shudder, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. The figure screeched, its ember eyes flickering as the light around it dimmed. It reached for me, its long fingers grazing my skin, but I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my body trembling, but resolute. The ritual was complete. The creature's power was broken, its connection to the forest severed. But as the figure began to dissolve, its form unraveling into the darkness, I realized something else. The forest was still alive, still watching, still waiting. The ritual had not destroyed it. It had only changed it, shifted its hunger from one form to another. The creature had been but a part of the forest's will, its desire to consume and claim. Now, that hunger was free to take on new shapes, new forms. The whispers died down, but the silence that followed was deafening. The forest seemed to breathe, its pulse slow and steady, like the beat of a heart that had never truly stopped. I looked around, my heart still pounding in my chest, but I knew it was over. The creature was gone, and the forest's grip on me had loosened. For now, at least. But I also knew that I could never truly leave. The forest had claimed me, marked me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always be with me. I turned and began walking, the clearing behind me now empty, the stones silent. The trees parted before me, their branches creaking as I passed, as if acknowledging my presence. I didn't know where the path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain: the forest would always be there, waiting, watching, hungry. I had thought I could escape, but I was wrong. The forest had never let me go. It had always been a part of me, and I had always been a part of it. And as I walked into the darkness, I could feel it. The forest was still watching, still waiting, and it would never, ever let me go. The trees closed in behind me, their branches twisting together as though they were alive, as though they had been waiting for me to make this final step. The path ahead was dim, the moonlight barely filtering through the dense canopy, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to follow me with every step I took. I walked, not knowing where I was going, not knowing if there was even a way out anymore. The forest felt endless, stretching far beyond where my mind could comprehend. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something older, something darker that I couldn't quite place. The whispers, though quieter now, still lingered, curling around my thoughts, seeping into my bones. They spoke in fragments, like broken memories, reminding me of everything I had seen, everything I had done. The journal in my bag felt heavier with each passing moment. It had been with me through everything. Its pages now filled with more than just the creature's story. It had become a part of me, too, a record of my descent into the forest depths. I had thought that completing the ritual would sever the connection, that the forest would release its hold on me. But now, as I walked deeper into the woods, I knew that was a lie. The forest wasn't something you could escape. It wasn't something that could be destroyed. It was the land, the earth, the sky. It was ancient, eternal, and it had never needed to claim me fully. It only needed to watch. A rustling sound snapped me out of my thoughts. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart thudding in my chest. The sound was close, too close. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it. It was too faint, too elusive to be a human presence. A twig snapped, then another. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the beam danced wildly across the trees, revealing nothing. The shadows twisted, almost mocking me, as if the forest itself were toying with me, making me question what was real and what was imagined. My breath quickened, and I started walking faster, my footsteps faltering as I tried to ignore the feeling of eyes on me. Then I saw it, the faintest flicker of movement, a figure in the distance, standing just beyond the trees. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, and its form was a silhouette against the dark expanse of the forest. Its ember eyes glowed once more, faintly, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I froze. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't move. It simply stood there, its eyes locked on mine, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. They were no longer fragmented, no longer broken. They were clear now, their words sharp and full of meaning. You cannot leave. You belong here. You always have. I shook my head, my chest tight with panic. No, I won't go back. I won't be part of this anymore. But even as I thought it, I felt the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The ground beneath my feet shifted, the trees leaning closer, their branches creaking as if they were about to move. I was trapped, surrounded by the very thing that had haunted me, that had followed me from the moment I first set foot in this cursed place. The figure's eyes burned brighter, its form shifting, becoming more solid, more real with each passing second. Its long, twisted limbs stretched out toward me, and I could feel the heat of its presence, the pull of its hunger. You will never escape. The forest will always call you back. I turned and ran. My legs moved faster than they ever had before, my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of my breath ragged and desperate. The forest seemed to close in on me, the trees shifting, the ground uneven, as if it were trying to drag me back. The whispers grew louder, deafening now, their voices filling my head, drowning out everything else. I stumbled, falling to my knees, the dirt and leaves scraping against my skin. I could feel the forest pulse beneath me, its heartbeat in sync with my own. It was alive. It was always alive. I forced myself to my feet, pushing through the pain, the exhaustion. The figure was still there, always just out of reach, its ember eyes watching me, waiting for me to falter, to give in. I reached for the journal, my hands trembling as I pulled it from my bag. The pages fluttered in my hands, almost as if they were alive. I opened it, flipping through the pages frantically. The ritual, the symbols, the clues. There had to be something, anything, that could stop this. And then I saw it. A page I hadn't noticed before, a page that wasn't there when I first found the journal. It was a sketch, crude but unmistakable. A symbol, one I hadn't seen in the forest before, one I hadn't seen in the journal until now. It was a circle with lines radiating outward, but at the center, there was a figure tall, thin, with ember eyes. The figure was standing in the center of the symbol, as if bound to it. Beneath the sketch was a single word, binding. I had seen this symbol before. I knew it now. It was the source, the anchor that held the forest's power in place. If I could find it, if I could reach it, maybe, just maybe, I could sever the connection once and for all. But the forest was closing in, its hunger growing, its grip tightening. I didn't have much time. I shoved the journal back into my bag, my hands shaking, and turned toward the trees. The figure was still there, its ember eyes locked on mine. I could feel its pull, its power. It was waiting for me to come back, to submit to its will. But I wasn't going to let it win. Not this time. I ran again, my legs burning, my breath ragged, the whispers chasing me like a storm. I didn't know where the symbol was. I didn't know if it even existed anymore. But I had to find it. I had to break free. The forest wouldn't let me go. But I wasn't going to stop until I made it. I ran, my legs aching, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, a labyrinth of trees and shadows that twisted and turned, making every step feel like a step deeper into its grasp. The whispers grew louder, no longer just voices, but a cacophony of commands, promises, and threats. They were all around me, inside my head, urging me to stop, to give in, to embrace the forest as it had always wanted me to. I pushed through the pain, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the forest consume me again. I had to find the symbol, the binding, that would sever its hold once and for all. The trees closed in tighter, their branches reaching out like fingers, their shadows stretching long and dark across the ground. I could feel them, watching me, waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. I couldn't. The journal burned a hole in my bag, its weight growing heavier with every step. I could feel its pull, as if it were trying to guide me, to show me the way. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking as I pulled it out and flipped through the pages, searching for anything that could help me. The sketch of the symbol was still there, staring back at me. I focused on it, trying to piece together what it meant, where it was, how to find it. And then I saw it, another note buried in the margins of the page. It was small, almost hidden, but the words were clear. Follow the roots. My mind raced. Follow the roots? What did that mean? The roots of the trees? The roots of the forest? I didn't have time to think about it. I had to act. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The trees were so thick, so close together, I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. But then I noticed something strange. The roots. They were different here. The ground was uneven, but there were thick, gnarled roots snaking up from the earth, twisting in unnatural patterns, as if they were reaching for something. The roots seemed to form a path, a trail leading deeper into the forest, and without thinking, I began to follow them. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the ground beneath my feet soft and treacherous. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, as if the forest itself was screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I had to keep going. The roots led me to a clearing, one I had never seen before. It was small, almost hidden, surrounded by trees that were older, larger than any I had encountered. At the center of the clearing was a stone, ancient and weathered, covered in moss and vines. The roots of the trees seemed to converge on the stone, wrapping around it, as if they were feeding into it, drawing power from it. I knew immediately that this was it, the source, the binding. The stone was marked with the symbol from the journal, the one I had seen in the sketch. It was glowing now, faintly, pulsing with an eerie light. The air around it felt thick, heavy, charged with energy. I could feel the forest's heartbeat in my chest, its presence pressing in on me, but I didn't stop. I had to break the connection. I had to destroy it. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the stone. The moment I made contact, a shock of energy coursed through me, so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. The roots around the stone trembled, their twisting forms shifting, as if they were alive, as if they were fighting back. The whispers became a roar, a deafening cacophony of voices that filled my mind, drowning out everything else. The forest was screaming, the creature was screaming, and I could feel it, its hunger, its fury, its desire to consume me. But I held on. I closed my eyes, focusing on the symbol, on the energy coursing through the stone. The ritual, the binding, it was all coming together. I had to break it, to sever the connection between the forest and the creature once and for all. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pressed my palm harder against the stone, forcing the energy to flow through me. The roots around me twisted violently, the trees groaning, the ground beneath me shaking. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the forest itself was trying to pull me into its depths. And then, with a final, explosive surge of energy, I let go. The world around me exploded in light. For a moment, there was nothing but blinding brightness, a sharp pain that pierced through my entire body. The whispers stopped. The trees stopped moving. The ground stopped shaking. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was still there, but everything was different. The air was still. The oppressive weight of the forest lifted. The roots that had once been so alive, so powerful, were now still, withered, as if they had been drained of life. The stone was no longer glowing, its power extinguished. I stumbled back, my legs weak, my body shaking from the effort. The forest had been broken. The creature's hold was gone. But as I looked around, I realized something. The forest was still there, still alive, but it was quieter now. The hunger, the whispers, the creature, they were gone. For now. I wasn't free, though. I knew that. The forest had always been a part of me, and no matter how much I wanted to escape, I couldn't. It had marked me, claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always be there, in the shadows, in the whispers, in the depths of my mind. I turned and began to walk away, my footsteps heavy, my heart still racing. The forest was still watching, but for the first time, I didn't feel its hunger. It was waiting, yes, but this time it was waiting for something else. And I knew, deep down, that the forest would always be there, just beyond the edge of my vision, just beyond the edge of my mind. Waiting, watching, but I had broken its grip. For now, I thought I was free. I thought I had severed the connection, broken the forest's hold. But as I stumbled back toward the edge of the woods, the weight of the silence began to settle in, heavier than any of the whispers that had once filled the air. The forest felt different. It was no longer alive in the way it had been before, no longer pulsing with hunger or desire, but it was still there, watching, waiting. I kept moving, my legs moving faster now, as if the very thought of being near it for any longer might pull me back into its depths. I didn't dare look behind me, not even once. The last thing I wanted was to see those ember eyes, to hear that guttural growl once more. But something gnawed at the back of my mind, something that whispered that I hadn't truly escaped. I reached the edge of the forest, just as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, the sky shifting from black to pale gray. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the sounds of the world outside the woods. I thought I would feel relief, but all I felt was emptiness. The weight of what I had done, or what I had failed to do, hung over me like a shroud. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked at the edge of the dirt road where I had left it days ago. The door creaked as I opened it, the sound strangely loud in the quiet morning. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I could feel the weight of the journal beside me, its presence a constant reminder of the things I had seen, the things I had felt. I wanted to burn it, to destroy it, to rid myself of the only piece of the forest that remained. But something stopped me. A part of me, deep inside, knew that the journal was the key. It was the only thing that could keep me from falling back into the forest's grip. The drive back home was a blur. I didn't look at the road, didn't focus on anything outside the car. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of images, of memories that I couldn't shake. I kept seeing those ember eyes, kept hearing that low growl, like the creature was still out there, still hunting me, still waiting. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun had fully risen, casting its warm light across the yard. It should have felt like a relief, but instead, it felt like a lie. The calmness of the world outside only made the silence inside me feel more profound, more oppressive. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face the reality that my life had been irrevocably changed, that the forest had followed me back, that I could never truly escape it. But I had no choice. I couldn't stay in the car forever. I grabbed the journal, my fingers still trembling. and stepped out of the car. The air felt heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. I walked slowly toward the front door, feeling the eyes of the trees on me even though they were miles away. The whispers were faint now, almost imperceptible, but they were there, lurking just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of home doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. I set the journal on the kitchen table and just stared at it, willing myself to move, to do something, and then it happened. The whispers began again, but this time, they weren't in my mind. They were coming from the walls. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was faint at first, like the soft rustling of paper, but it grew louder, clearer. The whispers, the same guttural, unintelligible voices, were coming from every corner of the room. I ran to the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. I tried to turn the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I backed away, my heart racing, my hands shaking as I turned to face the kitchen. The journal on the table was glowing. The symbols were glowing, the same ones I had seen in the forest, now etched into the pages, pulsing with an eerie light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the air around me thickening, growing heavier, as if the forest itself was seeping into the house. The door behind me rattled as someone pounded on it, their fists slamming against the wood with a force that made the walls shake. The whispers seemed to grow in response, as if the very house was alive, responding to the presence outside. And then I heard it, the low, guttural growl. It was close, too close. I turned, my eyes wide with terror, and there it was, the figure, the same tall, thin shape I had seen in the forest. Its ember eyes burned in the darkness, glowing with a terrible hunger. It was standing in the doorway, its long fingers curling around the frame as it stepped forward, its movement jerky and unnatural. The whispers grew louder, the growl growing more intense, more violent. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. But the figure didn't stop. It was coming for me. I reached for the journal, my fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages, desperately searching for something, anything, that could help me. The pages were turning faster now, as if they were alive, the ink shifting and changing before my eyes. The symbols pulsed with a terrible energy, and I realized too late that I had made a mistake. The ritual wasn't over. The forest hadn't let me go. The creature was no longer bound to the woods. It had followed me. It had always been with me, and now it was here in my home, in my life. I looked up, and the figure was right in front of me now, its ember eyes locked onto mine. And then it spoke. "Welcome home." The words hung in the air like a curse, thick with a presence that wasn't just in the room, but inside me. My heart pounded in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears as I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for something, anything that could stop this nightmare. The figure's ember eyes bore into mine, and for the first time, I realized what it was. It wasn't just watching me. It was waiting for something, for me, for this moment. The growl that had once been distant and terrifying now felt like a whisper in my bones, vibrating with a low hum of hunger. I could feel the forest again, but this time, it wasn't just a presence. It was an invasion. The walls around me seemed to pulse, as if the house itself were alive, breathing with the same dark energy that had once surrounded me in the woods. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the whispers had returned, louder now, swirling around me like a storm of voices. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare into the creature's eyes, paralyzed by fear, by the recognition that I was no longer in control of my fate. And then the figure took a step forward. I stumbled back, my hands trembling, but the figure didn't stop. It moved closer, its form shifting in the shadows like smoke, its long, skeletal fingers outstretched. The growl grew louder, more insistent, and I felt it a pull, a gravity that was dragging me toward it. The journal. It was still in my hands, but it felt heavier now, as though it were alive, as though it were part of the forest, part of the creature. The pages were shifting again, turning faster, the symbols on them flickering with an unnatural light. I barely had time to register the change before the words on the page started to form something new, something different. A new ritual, a new command. The whispers in the room seemed to quiet for a moment, as if the creature was listening, waiting. And then I saw it, the final page. It was blank, except for one word written in a script I didn't recognize. A single word, glowing with the same ember light as the creature's eyes. Consume. The word burned into my mind, and suddenly I understood. The creature wasn't just a being of hunger. It wasn't just waiting to claim me. It was waiting for me to choose. The ritual, the journal, the symbols, they were all part of the same thing. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a force, an entity that fed on fear, on life, on choice. The choice was mine. I had been marked the moment I stepped into the woods. I had been drawn into its web, a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The journal, the symbols, the creature, it had all been leading to this moment. I could feel the weight of it, the inevitability of it. The figure was right in front of me now, its breath hot and foul against my skin. Its fingers reached out, brushing against my cheek, and I flinched, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. The creature's eyes gleamed with a terrible knowing, and I realized that I had been running from it for too long. It had always been with me. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices, all urging me to give in. Consume. Surrender. Let it in. Join us. I could feel the pull of the forest, of the creature, of the choice it was offering me. The words were clear now, in my mind, in my heart. Consume. The forest was offering me power, offering me freedom from the fear, from the pain. But at what cost? I glanced at the journal again, the pages now filled with new symbols, more intricate, more alive than before. The figure's growl was low, almost a purr, as it waited for me to make my decision. And then it all clicked. The ritual, the symbols, the creature, it wasn't just about consuming me. It was about consuming the forest, about breaking the cycle. I understood now. The power wasn't in the creature's hunger. It was in my choice. I had to destroy it. I gripped the journal tightly, my hands shaking, and with a force I didn't know I had left, I slammed the book onto the floor. The symbols on the pages flared with a brilliant, blinding light, and the room shook as the growl of the creature turned into a roar, a sound that tore through the air like a living thing. The walls cracked, the house groaning as the forest began to push in, its roots breaking through the floorboards, its branches reaching through the windows. The figure screamed, its voice high and shrill, as the power of the ritual began to unravel. The journal burned with a white-hot flame, the symbols on its pages swirling and twisting into a vortex of light. The creature reached for me, but it was too late. The forest was no longer in control. I was. With every ounce of strength I had left, I reached into the vortex, my fingers touching the center of the spinning symbols. And then, with a final, explosive surge of energy, I pulled the forest, pulled the creature, pulled everything that had haunted me back into the darkness. The roar of the creature faded into a distant whisper, the walls of the house collapsing around me. The air grew still, the weight of the forest lifting, leaving only silence in its wake. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling, my mind reeling from the sheer force of what had just happened. I could still feel the presence of the creature, but it was fading now, slipping away, as if it had never truly been there. The journal, too, was gone, its pages now blank, the symbols erased. The house was quiet, the whispers were gone, but I knew, deep down, that the forest would never truly leave me. It had marked me, claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always be there, just beyond the edge of my mind, waiting, watching, and I would never forget the choice I had made. The silence in the house was deafening, and as I sat there, drenched in sweat and shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. The forest had receded, but the weight of its presence lingered, pressing down on me like a heavy fog. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and glanced around the room. The walls were intact now, no longer groaning under the strain of the forest's encroachment. The floor was solid, the air clear, but something felt wrong. The emptiness, the stillness. It was as though the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped cautiously toward the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to escape, to run as far away from this place as I could. But something deep within me told me that it wasn't over, that the forest, the creature, would find another way to claim me. It had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, and I knew that no matter how far I ran, it would follow. I opened the door. The world outside was unchanged, bathed in the soft light of early morning. The birds were singing, the air crisp with the scent of pine and earth. It looked so normal, so safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still there, just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped outside, my feet crunching against the gravel driveway. The sun was bright, the world awake, but I felt like I was walking in a dream. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through a world that wasn't mine. The weight of the forest still pressed on me, a shadow that followed my every movement. I walked to my car, my hands trembling as I reached for the door handle. I needed to leave. I needed to get as far away from here as possible. But as I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. The trees. They were too still. The forest behind my house, which had always been a comforting backdrop to my life, now seemed unnatural. The branches hung heavy, like dark, twisted fingers reaching for the sky. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, casting the forest in an eerie, twilight glow. And then I saw it, just for a moment, a flicker of movement between the trees. A figure, tall, thin, its ember eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creature, it was back. I slammed the car into reverse, my heart pounding in my chest as I sped down the driveway, my eyes locked on the figure in the trees. But it didn't move. It just stood there watching, waiting. The growl was faint, distant, but I could hear it, reverberating in my bones. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring as I tore down the road, away from the house, away from the forest, away from the thing that had been chasing me for so long. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how far I ran, I knew deep down that it wasn't over. The creature was still out there, still following me, still waiting. The forest had never truly let me go. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the figure was gone. The trees were empty, their dark silhouettes fading into the distance. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but I knew better. The whispers were still there, faint but persistent, swirling around me like a storm. The symbols were still etched into my skin, still pulsing beneath the surface. The forest had marked me. It had claimed me, and it would never stop hunting me. As I drove, I could feel it, the pull. It was subtle at first, a tug at the edges of my mind, but it was growing stronger. The forest was calling me back. It was waiting for me to return, to finish what I had started. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't hide from it. The creature's eyes flashed in my mind, burning with hunger. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and I made a choice. I wasn't going back to the forest. I couldn't, but I would find a way to stop it, to end this nightmare once and for all. The journal had given me the answers I needed. The ritual wasn't just a way to sever the connection, it was a way to destroy the forest, to break its hold on me, on everything it had touched. But I had to find the source of its power. I had to face it, confront it, and destroy it. The creature's ember eyes filled my mind again, and I knew that it wasn't just waiting for me to return to the forest. It was waiting for me to finish what I had started, to complete the ritual, and I would, no matter what it cost. The road stretched ahead of me, endless and dark, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't focus on the asphalt beneath my tires, couldn't concentrate on the hum of the engine or the rhythmic thrum of the wheels turning. My thoughts were consumed by the forest, by the creature, by the weight of the ritual that still haunted me. The journal was right. There was no escaping it. The creature's hunger, its pull, it wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something primal, embedded in the very fabric of my being. The forest had marked me, carved its presence into my soul, and no matter how far I ran, I would never be free. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The dark trees were receding into the distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. The creature's eyes, those ember eyes, burned into my mind, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't outrun it. Not forever. I had to go back, but this time it would be different. This time, I would finish what I started. I would find the source of its power, the heart of the forest, and destroy it. I didn't know how, but the journal had given me a map, a vague hint of a place deep within the woods where the creature's hold could be broken. A place marked by the largest of the symbols, the one that pulsed with an otherworldly light. I wasn't sure what I would find there, but I knew I couldn't stop until I reached it. The car's headlights cut through the darkness as I drove, my hands gripping the wheel with white-knuckled determination. My mind raced with the ritual, with the steps I would need to take, the sacrifices I might have to make. The journal's pages had been clear about one thing. The ritual would come at a cost. I didn't know what that cost would be, but I was prepared to pay it. I could feel the pull of the forest, like a magnetic force drawing me back, urging me toward the clearing, toward the source of the creature's power. It wasn't just the creature I had to destroy, it was the forest itself. The darkness that had taken root in the earth, the ancient force that had been feeding on fear and life for centuries. It had to end. I had to end it. The hours passed in a blur, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The forest was calling to me, and the closer I got, the louder the whispers grew. The symbols in my mind, etched into my skin, pulsed with a sickly rhythm, guiding me like a beacon through the night. Finally, I reached the edge of the woods. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their twisted forms looming in the darkness. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The forest was alive, but not in the way I remembered. It was darker now, more oppressive, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I parked the car at the edge of the road and stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me. The ground felt different beneath my feet, as if the earth itself were shifting, pulling me toward the heart of the woods. The symbols were everywhere, carved into the trees, painted on the ground, glowing faintly with a sickly light. I took a deep breath and started walking. The path seemed to open before me, the trees parting like a veil, guiding me deeper into the forest. The whispers were louder now, filling my ears, urging me forward. The growl of the creature was distant, but I could feel it like a vibration in my chest. It was close. It was waiting. I followed the symbols, each one leading me closer to the clearing, to the source of the creature's power. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around me. The ground was soft, spongy beneath my feet, as if the forest itself were alive, breathing, shifting with every step I took. And then I saw it, the clearing. It was surrounded by massive trees, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. In the center of the clearing was a large stone altar covered in moss and vines. The symbols were carved into the stone, glowing with an eerie light, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. I approached cautiously, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The creature was here. I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond the trees, its ember eyes watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal. The pages were still shifting, still revealing new symbols, new instructions. I turned to the page that had haunted me, the one with the final ritual, the one that would break the forest's hold on me. The words were clear now. I had to consume, not just the creature, not just the forest. I had to consume the power itself, absorb it, take it into myself. Only then could I sever the connection, destroy the creature, and break the forest's hold on this world. I didn't know what that meant, what the consequences would be, but I knew I had no choice. The creature was too powerful, too ancient. It would never stop hunting me unless I destroyed it, unless I took its power for myself. The altar was waiting. The symbols on it were pulsing with energy, calling to me, urging me to begin. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The forest held its breath with me, the air thick with anticipation. I stepped forward, placing my hands on the altar. The symbols flared to life, the light blinding, searing through my mind. And then I consumed. The moment my hands touched the altar, a violent surge of energy coursed through me. It was like being struck by lightning, but without the pain, just pure, unrelenting power filling every cell in my body. The symbols on the stone flared brighter, their glow searing into my vision. I could hear the creature now, its guttural growl vibrating in the very air around me, closer than ever. It was coming for me, but I couldn't stop. I had to finish this. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, as if the very earth were alive, pulling at my feet, urging me deeper into the ritual. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the forest pulse echoing in my chest. The whispers were deafening now, filling my mind, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but I felt them in my bones. They were urging me forward, urging me to consume everything, to take the power of the forest into me and become something more. I could feel the creature's presence, like a shadow at the edge of my vision, but I didn't dare open my eyes. I was too deep now. I was too close. The energy from the altar surged again, and I felt something snap inside me. It was as though a door had opened in my mind, and I was flooded with visions of the forest in its primal, ancient state. I saw the creature in its true form. Not just the shadowy figure that haunted my dreams, but something far older, far more terrifying. It was a being of the forest, born from the earth itself, its power woven into the very fabric of the trees, the soil, the wind. I could feel its hunger, its desire to claim me, to consume me, just as it had consumed so many before me. But now I understood. I wasn't just a victim. I was a part of this. I was a part of the forest, just as much as the creature was. I opened my eyes, and the clearing around me was no longer the same. The trees had come alive, their gnarled roots writhing like serpents, their branches twisting and reaching toward me, as if the forest itself were trying to pull me in. The creature was there, standing in the shadows, its ember eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. But now I could feel it. I could feel the creature's power, its essence, flowing through me, merging with my own. The ritual had worked. The forest's power was mine, and I was no longer afraid. I took a step forward, and the creature's growl turned to a hiss of surprise. It was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The power that had once belonged to it now flowed through me, and I could feel its fear, its desperation. It knew what I had become. I raised my hands, the symbols on the altar still glowing with an eerie light, and the forest responded. The trees groaned, their roots breaking through the earth, reaching for the creature. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the very earth itself turned against it. The creature howled, a sound that shook the air, but it was too late. The forest had already claimed it. The trees closed in, their roots wrapping around the creature, pulling it into the earth. The ground swallowed it whole, and the forest fell silent. The whispers faded, the pulsing light from the altar dimming until it was nothing more than a faint glow in the distance. I stood there, breathing heavily, my body still crackling with the energy of the ritual. The power was mine now, but it was a power that came at a cost. The forest had taken everything from me, and in return, I had taken everything from it. I was no longer just a part of the forest, I was its master. But even as I stood there, feeling the weight of the forest's power coursing through me, I knew that this was not the end. The creature was gone, but its essence, its hunger, had not been destroyed. It had been transferred into me. The forest was still alive, still watching, still waiting. And now, I was the one who would feed it. The ritual had worked, but the cost was clear. I had become the thing I feared most, the creature that had stalked me, hunted me, and now I was the one who would do the hunting. I turned and walked away from the altar, the forest parting before me, its trees bowing as I passed. The whispers followed me, but they no longer spoke of fear. They spoke of reverence. I was the forest now, and the forest would never let me go. The air around me felt different now, charged with an unnatural energy that hummed beneath my skin. Every step I took was accompanied by a low, resonant thrum from the earth, as if the forest itself were acknowledging my presence, recognizing me as its new ruler. The trees whispered, but not in fear. They spoke to me as an old friend, a familiar presence, urging me forward, urging me deeper into the heart of the woods. I had become something else, not human, not entirely. The power I had consumed, absorbed, had changed me, twisted me into something that was part of the forest, part of the creature I had defeated. I could feel its hunger, its need to consume, pulsing inside me, just as it had pulsed in the creature before me. But now, it was mine to control. I could feel the trees responding to my thoughts, the roots moving beneath my feet as I willed them to shift. The symbols, once cryptic and mysterious, were now clear, each one a command, a key to the forest's secrets. I knew the forest better than I ever had before. I could hear the heartbeat of every living thing within it, the rustle of leaves, the scurry of small animals, the distant cry of birds. And I could feel the power that flowed through every branch, every leaf, every blade of grass. It was a power that I had claimed as my own, and now I was its master. But as I walked deeper into the forest, I felt a growing unease. The hunger inside me, the creature's hunger, was insatiable. It clawed at the edges of my mind, urging me to feed, to consume more, to grow stronger. The trees seemed to pulse with the same rhythm, their roots digging deeper into the earth, as if they too were feeding on something I hadn't yet understood. I could feel the weight of the ritual settling on me, the cost of what I had done. The forest had not only given me its power, it had taken something from me as well. A part of me had been left behind in that clearing, in the ritual's dark embrace. My humanity, my soul, had been consumed by the forest's hunger. I was no longer the person I had been when I first entered the woods. I was something else, something darker. I paused in the clearing, looking around at the towering trees that surrounded me. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, the remnants of the creature's presence still lingering in the air. The forest was still alive, but it was different now. It was no longer a place of mystery and fear. It was mine, and it was hungry. I could feel the presence of others who had been lost to the forest before me, their spirits still lingering in the shadows. They were watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. The whispers grew louder, but this time, they were not the soft, beckoning whispers of the trees. They were the voices of those who had come before me, their voices twisted by the same hunger that now consumed me. I turned my gaze to the horizon, where the forest stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of darkness and shadow. The hunger inside me gnawed at my insides, a constant, insistent pull toward the depths of the woods. The creature had been the first to feed, but now it was my turn to hunt. I closed my eyes, letting the forest's pulse guide me. I could feel the creatures of the woods, the ones that had once been prey, now trembling in fear as I approached. I could feel their hearts racing, their fear feeding my own hunger. And I knew what I had to do. I took a step forward, and the forest moved with me. The trees bent low, their branches reaching out like fingers, guiding me toward my next victim. The hunger was a part of me now, and I would never escape it. The forest had claimed me, and I would claim it in return. As I moved deeper into the woods, I could feel the power growing inside me, swelling with each step. The trees whispered louder now, urging me on, their voices mingling with the cries of those who had been lost before me. I could feel them all, every lost soul, every broken spirit, trapped in the forest's endless hunger. And now, I was one of them. I was no longer just a part of the forest. I was the forest, and the forest would never let me go. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more the landscape seemed to warp and twist. The trees, once familiar and towering, now bent and writhed as if they were alive, their bark shifting and pulsating under the weight of the power I had claimed. The ground beneath me felt soft and uneven, as if the earth itself was breathing, inhaling and exhaling in time with my own ragged breaths. I could feel the creatures of the woods skittering in the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched me, knowing what I had become. The hunger was always there, a constant, gnawing presence deep within my chest. It pulsed with every beat of my heart, a reminder of the price I had paid. I could feel the energy of the forest surging through me, mingling with the dark essence of the creature I had defeated, and I knew that the forest would never let me rest. It had claimed me, and I had claimed it in return. But now, the lines between us were blurred. I was no longer a person, no longer a mere wanderer lost in its depths. I was a part of the forest, and it was a part of me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just the murmurs of the trees. They were the voices of the lost, the ones who had fallen before me, consumed by the same hunger that now thrummed in my veins. They called to me, their voices soft and pleading, urging me to feed, to hunt, to claim what was mine. I could feel them all around me, lost souls, trapped in the web of the forest, bound by its insatiable hunger. They were the ones who had once walked these woods, just as I had, but now they were nothing more than shadows, their forms twisted and broken by the forest's power. And I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to make my next move. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear that had once consumed me had been replaced by something darker, something more primal. The hunger was my only companion now, and it would never leave me. I stopped in the middle of the clearing, my eyes scanning the darkened woods. The trees parted before me, the roots shifting and curling like serpents, guiding me deeper into the heart of the forest. The air grew thicker, heavier, and I could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that had been here long before I had ever set foot in these woods. It was the source of the forest's hunger, the thing that had given birth to the creature I had defeated, the thing that had drawn me here in the first place. I knew it was watching me, waiting for me to come closer. The hunger surged within me, and I followed the path the trees had laid out for me, my footsteps soundless on the soft earth. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but I couldn't make out the words anymore. It was as if they were all speaking at once, their voices melding together into a single, maddening chorus. And then I saw it. In the heart of the clearing, surrounded by the tallest trees I had ever seen, stood a massive stone structure. It was ancient, weathered by time and covered in vines and moss, but I could feel its power radiating from it, an energy so potent it made my skin tingle. The stone was covered in the same symbols that had haunted me, etched into the surface in intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with a dark, rhythmic energy. This was it, the source of the forest's power, the place where the hunger had begun. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I did, the ground beneath me trembled. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel the presence of someone inside the stone structure, watching me. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their words now a cacophony of pleading and hunger. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold stone. The moment I touched it, a surge of energy shot through me, and I was thrown back, landing hard on the ground. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I had lost consciousness. But then I saw it. A figure stood in the center of the stone structure, its form obscured by shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. Its eyes glowed with the same ember-like intensity that had haunted me since the moment I first saw the creature in the forest. But this was different. This was no mere shadow. This was the source of it all. It stepped forward, and the ground beneath me shook. The trees recoiled as if in fear, their branches snapping back, and the whispers fell silent. The figure spoke, its voice low and guttural, reverberating through the air like the rumble of distant thunder. "You are mine now," it said. "You have claimed the power of the forest, but you are still bound to it. You will feed it just as I have. You will become one with it, just as I have." I could feel the hunger surging inside me, growing stronger with each word it spoke. The creature, the figure, was not just a part of the forest. It was the forest. It had always been here, hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone to claim its power. And now, it had found me. I stood, trembling, my body alive with the dark energy of the forest. I had become the hunter, but I was also the prey. The hunger that had once been a gnawing presence in the back of my mind was now a ravenous force, consuming me from within. The figure stepped closer, its ember eyes locking onto mine. "You are mine," it repeated, its voice a command, "and you will never leave." The hunger roared inside me, drowning out everything else. I was no longer in control. The forest had claimed me, and there was no escape. As the figure reached out to touch me, I felt the last remnants of my humanity slip away. The hunger had consumed me completely, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that I would never leave these woods. I was the forest now, and the forest would never let me go. The figure's touch was like ice, cold and unyielding. It spread through my skin, sinking into my very bones, and for a moment I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. The hunger inside me roared in response, a deafening, insatiable cry that echoed through the trees. The forest itself seemed to tremble with it, the ground beneath my feet shifting, the air thick with a power older than time itself. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mouth moved, but the words were lost in the overwhelming pull of the forest's power. The figure loomed above me, its ember eyes burning with an intensity that felt like they were searing through my soul. "You have become what you feared," it whispered, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "You have become part of the hunger." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I staggered back, my mind reeling. The hunger was no longer just a part of me. It was me. It was everything. I could feel it coursing through the trees, through the very earth beneath my feet. It was the pulse of the forest, the dark heart that beat in time with my own. And I could feel it calling to me, urging me to feed, to consume, to grow stronger. But it was more than that now. The hunger wasn't just a force, it was a presence, a living thing, and it was inside me. I could feel its desires, its need to spread, to consume everything in its path. It was a parasite, and I was its vessel. The power I had claimed was now a curse, an unbreakable bond that tied me to the forest, to the creature that had drawn me here. I tried to pull away, to resist, but the hunger had a hold on me that I couldn't escape. It whispered in my mind, telling me that this was my destiny, that this was the price of power. The forest had chosen me, and now I was bound to it, a part of its endless cycle of consumption. The figure reached out again, its long, twisted fingers brushing my cheek. I flinched, but there was no escaping it now. The hunger had claimed me, and there was no turning back. "You are no longer human," the figure said, its voice cold and triumphant. "You are a part of the forest now. You will never leave. You will feed, and you will grow, until the hunger consumes all." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. The forest had taken everything from me, my humanity, my freedom, my very soul. And now, there was nothing left. I was no longer a person. I was a part of the darkness, a vessel for the forest's insatiable appetite. But even in the depths of that despair, something stirred inside me. A flicker of defiance, a tiny spark of the person I had once been. It was faint, but it was there. I could still feel the remnants of my own will, buried beneath the hunger, buried beneath the power of the forest. It was weak, but it was enough. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed back. I fought against the hunger, against the power that was consuming me. It was a battle I knew I couldn't win, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. The figure's ember eyes flickered with amusement, but I saw something else in them, a flicker of recognition. It had seen this before. It had seen others try to resist, try to break free from the forest's grasp, and it had seen them fail. But I wasn't going to fail. With a final, desperate surge of will, I reached for the stone structure, the source of the forest's power. My fingers brushed the cold surface again, and this time, instead of the searing cold, I felt a rush of warmth, of light. The hunger recoiled, momentarily stunned, as if it had never felt this before. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give me hope. The figure hissed, its form flickering, as if it was losing its grip on reality. The forest itself seemed to tremble, the trees shaking as if they were in pain. The whispers rose to a crescendo, their voices rising in anger and fear. "You cannot escape," the figure snarled. "You are mine." But I was already moving. I wasn't sure how, but I was. The hunger still clawed at me, but now it felt distant, as if I were standing at the edge of it, instead of being consumed by it. I reached for the journal, the one that had once been my guide, the one that had shown me the path to this place. It was in my hands now, and the pages had changed again, the symbols shifting, the instructions becoming clearer. I could feel the ritual, the final step. It was a choice, a sacrifice, a way to sever the bond, to break the forest's hold on me. It would cost me everything, my soul, my life, but it was the only way. I stepped forward, my body trembling with the weight of the decision. The figure lunged at me, but I was ready. I slammed the journal into the stone, and the ground beneath me shook. The trees groaned, their roots writhing in agony as the power of the forest recoiled, as if the very foundation of its existence was being torn apart. The figure screamed, its form twisting and distorting, but it was too late. The ritual was complete. The hunger howled a final, desperate cry, and then, all at once, it was gone. The forest fell silent. I collapsed to my knees, the weight of what I had done settling over me. The hunger was gone, but so was everything else. The forest, the creature, the power I had once claimed, it was all gone. And in its place was a stillness, an eerie calm. But even as I sat there, breathing heavily, I could feel the forest gaze on me. It was no longer a predator. It was a part of me, and I was a part of it. The bond had been severed, but the forest's power still lingered deep within me. I didn't know if I would ever truly escape it. The hunger might be gone, but the forest would always be a part of me. The darkness, the whispers, the pull of the trees, they would never fully fade. But for now, at least, I was free. And that, I realized, was the only victory I could claim. The silence of the forest was deafening. I sat there, on the cold, damp ground, my chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. My body was exhausted, but my mind was even more so. The hunger had left me, but the remnants of it still gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, like a distant echo I couldn't shake. I looked around, half expecting the trees to move, to shift, to reclaim me. But they stood still, silent sentinels watching me, as if waiting for something. The weight of their gaze pressed down on me, a reminder that, while the creature was gone, the forest itself was far from forgotten. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and glanced down at the journal still clutched in my hand. The pages were blank now, empty, as if the very act of completing the ritual had erased its purpose. The symbols, the instructions, they were gone. There was no more guidance, no more answers. I was alone, left to pick up the pieces of what was left of me. But I couldn't stay here. Not in this place. The forest might be silent, but it wasn't safe. The power I had felt, the pull, the hunger, was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to rise again. I had severed the bond, but I knew the forest would never truly let me go. It had marked me, branded me with its darkness, and no matter how far I ran, I would always carry a piece of it with me. The ground beneath my feet felt different now. The trees no longer seemed alive in the same way. They weren't watching me, waiting for me to slip. But there was something wrong. The forest had changed, as if the balance had been shifted, and I was no longer sure if it was better or worse. I took a step forward, then another, until I was walking again, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots the only sound in the stillness. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if there was anywhere left to go, but I couldn't stay here. I couldn't remain in this place that had almost consumed me. As I walked, the trees began to thin. The oppressive weight of the forest lifted slightly, and I could feel the air growing lighter, the oppressive darkness receding. But there was no comfort in it. I knew better than to trust the quiet. The forest had given me nothing but lies and nightmares. I couldn't forget what it had done to me, what it had almost made me become. Hours passed, or maybe days. I couldn't tell anymore. The sun was a faint memory, and the sky above was a patchwork of shadows. My mind was frayed, the edges of my thoughts slipping away like sand through my fingers. I was tired, so tired, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving, and then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a figment of my exhausted mind. But as I drew closer, I saw it clearly. The cabin, the same one I had run from so many days ago. The same place I had thought was gone, erased by the ritual. But there it was, standing in the middle of the forest, as if it had never been touched by the forces I had unleashed. My heart pounded in my chest. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be. The journal had said the ritual would sever the connection. The forest couldn't still have a hold on me. It couldn't. But there it was. I approached cautiously, my breath shallow. The door was ajar, the same way it had been before. The familiar scent of decay filled my nostrils, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I couldn't go in. I couldn't let the forest pull me back in again. But something inside me urged me forward. The hunger, the pull of the forest, it was still there, whispering in my mind, telling me that I needed to finish what I had started. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand hovering over the door. The faintest sound drifted from within, something scraping against the wood, a slow, rhythmic sound that made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that whatever was inside, whatever had been left behind, was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. The air inside was thick, oppressive, just like before. The walls were covered in the same symbols, but now they seemed alive, pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved further into the room, my flashlight illuminating the broken furniture, the scattered papers, the same journal that had guided me here. But there was something else, a presence, something darker, more powerful than anything I had felt before. The air was thick with it, suffocating, pressing down on me like a vice. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the room, the figure stood. It was no longer just a shadow, no longer a vague silhouette in the darkness. It was real. Its ember eyes burned brighter than ever, casting an eerie glow across the room. Its form was twisted, elongated, a grotesque parody of the human shape. The hunger that had once been a part of me was now fully realized in this creature. It was alive, and it was waiting. You thought you could escape, it whispered, its voice like 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. But you can never escape what you have become. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I should have known. I should have known that nothing was ever truly gone. The forest had claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always find me again. The figure took a step forward, its movements slow, deliberate. The hunger radiated from it, filling the room with a suffocating heat. I could feel it deep inside me, clawing at my insides, urging me to join it, to embrace it once again. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. With a surge of defiance, I raised the journal, the last weapon I had left. The pages were blank, but I could feel the power within them, the remnants of the ritual I had completed. The symbols on the walls, the creature before me, they all knew this book. They knew what it could do. I opened the journal, and for the first time, the pages began to glow. The symbols on the walls flickered, shifting and writhing as the light from the journal filled the room. The figure screamed, its ember eyes flickering with rage and fear as the power of the forest began to unravel around it. You cannot stop this, it hissed, but I could hear the uncertainty in its voice. The power was slipping away, its grip weakening. And then, with a final, desperate cry, the figure collapsed, its form dissolving into the shadows, vanishing into the air like smoke. The room fell silent. The hunger was gone. The forest was silent. But I knew that it wasn't over. The forest had been defeated, but it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person to stumble into its grasp. I had broken the cycle, but I had also become a part of it. And as I stepped out of the cabin and into the quiet woods, I knew that I would never truly be free. The forest had claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, I would always carry its darkness with me. The hunger, the whispers, the pull was a part of me now, and it would never let me go. I had thought the worst was over. I had thought that by confronting the creature, by severing the connection between it and the forest, I could finally break free. But as I stood there in the aftermath, the silence pressing down on me, I realized the truth. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a part of me now, a part of my soul. The hunger, the whispers, they had marked me, branded me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The forest had taken root inside me, and no matter how far I ran, I would never be free of it. The air around me felt thick, heavy, as though the very atmosphere was saturated with something dark, something ancient. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with a rhythm that wasn't my own, as though the earth itself was alive and aware of my presence. The trees loomed above me, their branches twisting and stretching toward the sky like skeletal arms, their leaves rustling in a language I couldn't understand. I started walking, though I didn't know where I was going. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't remain in this place, this forest that had become so much more than a mere patch of land. It was a living thing, a thing that fed on fear, on despair. And it had claimed me. The further I walked, the more I began to feel it, like a weight on my chest, a pressure that grew with every step. The whispers had started again, faint at first, like a breeze carrying distant voices. But as I moved deeper into the woods, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just in my ears anymore. They were in my mind, in my thoughts, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I tried to ignore them, to push them away, but they kept coming. I couldn't outrun them. I couldn't escape them. And then, just as the whispers reached a fever pitch, I saw it. A figure standing in the distance, barely visible through the trees. At first, I thought it was just another hallucination, a trick of the light. But as I got closer, I realized it was real. The same tall, thin figure I had seen in the cabin, its ember eyes burning with that same insatiable hunger. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there waiting, watching. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the pull again, the hunger stirring deep within me, urging me to approach, to embrace the darkness. But I resisted. I had resisted before, and I would resist now. The figure tilted its head, its ember eyes flickering, as if studying me. It didn't need to speak. I could feel its thoughts in my mind, its presence pressing against me like a physical force. It wanted me. It wanted what I had become, but I wasn't ready to give in. I turned away, my legs moving on their own, carrying me further into the woods. The figure didn't follow. It didn't need to. I could feel it watching me, waiting for the moment I would break, the moment I would fall back into its grasp. But I wouldn't. Not again. I didn't know how long I walked. Hours? Days? Time had no meaning here. The forest stretched on endlessly, its twisted trees and gnarled roots, creating a labyrinth I could never escape. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were all I could hear, all I could think about. The hunger gnawed at me, a constant, unrelenting ache deep within my chest. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't live with this thing inside me, this darkness that refused to let me go. And then, as if an answer to my thoughts, I saw it. A clearing, a small patch of open ground, bathed in pale, sickly light. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, its surface covered in the same symbols I had seen throughout the forest. The symbols were etched into the stone, glowing faintly with an eerie light. I knew what it was before I even stepped into the clearing. I knew that this was the source, the heart of the forest's power, the place where it all began, the place where it could all end. I approached the altar slowly, the whispers growing louder, the hunger clawing at me, urging me to take the final step. I could feel the figure behind me, still watching, still waiting, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I placed the journal on the altar, the pages now covered in new symbols, new instructions. The ritual was clear now, the way to sever the connection once and for all. It would cost me everything, but it was the only way to stop the forest, to end its hold on me. With trembling hands, I began the ritual, tracing the symbols on the journal's pages, speaking the words aloud. The ground beneath me trembled, the air thickening with power. The hunger inside me roared to life, fighting against the ritual, but I pushed through, focusing on the words, on the symbols, on the ancient power that flowed through me. And then, with a final cry, the ground cracked open. The figure screamed, its ember eyes burning brighter than ever, but it was too late. The forest was unraveling, its power fading, the darkness dissipating like smoke in the wind. The hunger was gone. The whispers ceased. The forest fell silent. But I knew it wasn't over. The forest had claimed me once, and it would always be a part of me. I had severed its hold, but I couldn't erase what it had made me. The darkness was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the moment I would slip. I left the clearing, the journal still clutched in my hand. The trees no longer seemed to watch me, but I knew better than to trust the quiet. The forest had given me nothing but lies and nightmares, and I had become a part of it. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't free, not yet, but I was still alive, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and disbelief. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still there, somewhere just beyond the edges of my mind, waiting. It had been a victory, yes, but a hollow one. I had severed its hold, but the scars remained. The whispers still echoed in my thoughts, faint but persistent. And the hunger, it lingered, a gnawing emptiness deep inside me that I couldn't quite ignore. I returned to the city, to the life I had left behind, but nothing felt the same. The sounds of traffic, the chatter of people, the hum of fluorescent lights, it all felt distant, as though I were hearing it through a thick fog. The forest's presence clung to me like a second skin, suffocating, always there, just beneath the surface. I tried to go back to normal. I tried to immerse myself in work, in socializing, in anything that would drown out the lingering dread. But the symbols, they kept appearing. On the walls of my apartment, in the corners of rooms, scrawled in the condensation on bathroom mirrors. Sometimes, they would appear on the back of my hand, faint as though drawn with a fingertip, and I would scrub at them until my skin burned. The nightmares returned too, only now they were worse. I would wake up in the forest, the trees towering over me like a suffocating canopy, the symbols glowing faintly on their bark. The figure would always be there, its ember eyes burning into mine, waiting for me to succumb. I would try to run, but my legs felt like lead, and the ground would twist beneath me, pulling me deeper into the woods. Every time I woke, my body would be covered in dirt, leaves tangled in my hair, as though I had been walking in my sleep again. I couldn't trust myself anymore. I couldn't trust my mind. The line between the waking world and the nightmare had blurred, and I was trapped somewhere in between. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the journal, I noticed something new. A symbol I hadn't seen before, scrawled hastily across one of the pages. It was jagged and sharp, like a claw mark, and beneath it, a single word, return. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was a command, a summons, a pull that I couldn't ignore. The forest was calling me back. I knew it in my bones. I tried to fight it, to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the urge was too strong. The hunger, the whispers, the gnawing emptiness inside me, it all pointed in one direction. Back to the forest. I packed a bag, not bothering to think it through. I didn't know how I could resist anymore. Maybe I wasn't meant to. Maybe the forest had never truly let me go. The drive was a blur, the road stretching out before me like a dark river leading me back to the heart of the nightmare. The air grew colder the closer I got, the trees standing like silent sentinels at the edge of the road, their branches reaching toward me like skeletal hands. When I finally reached the clearing, the place where it all began, I stopped the car and got out. The forest was waiting. I stood at the edge, the familiar sense of dread creeping up my spine. But this time, there was no hesitation. The symbols were everywhere, glowing faintly in the darkness. as though the forest itself had come alive, waiting for me to step back into its embrace. I stepped forward, the ground soft beneath my feet. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the whispers began again, low and insistent, swirling around me like a storm. The hunger was there too, sharp and insatiable, gnawing at my insides. I followed the symbols, each one glowing brighter as I walked, until I found myself standing before the stone altar once more. The journal was still there, open to the page with the jagged symbol and the word return. The altar was cold, and the air felt heavy with power, as though something ancient and terrible was stirring beneath the surface. And then I saw it, the figure standing just beyond the altar, its ember eyes burning with that same hunger. It didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched, waiting. I knew what I had to do. The ritual was simple, almost too simple. The journal had provided the instructions, but now, standing before the altar, I realized the truth. The ritual wasn't meant to sever the connection. It was meant to bind me to the forest forever. I had been chosen. The forest had marked me, and now it was time to fulfill my role. The hunger, the whispers, the pull, it had all been leading me here, to this moment. I couldn't escape. I never could. The figure stepped forward, its long limbs stretching impossibly thin, its ember eyes glowing brighter, burning into mine. It didn't speak, but I could feel its presence in my mind, in my soul. It was part of me now, as much as I was part of it. I placed my hand on the altar, feeling the cold stone beneath my fingertips. The symbols on the altar began to glow, the light pulsating with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The hunger surged within me, filling me, overwhelming me. It was a part of me now, a part of the forest's ancient power. And then I understood I wasn't just a victim. I was the key. The forest had always known I would return. It had always known that I would be the one to complete the ritual, to become one with it. The figure, the hunger, the whispers, they weren't just the forest's power. They were me. I had always been a part of it, and it had always been a part of me. And as I stood there, my hand on the altar, the world around me began to change. The trees seemed to breathe. The ground shifted beneath my feet, and the sky above darkened with an unnatural heaviness. The forest was waking, and I was its heartbeat. I wasn't running anymore. I was home. The air around me thickened, the shadows deepened, and the forest seemed to pulse with life. It was no longer just a place, it was a living entity, and I was a part of it now, bound to it in a way I could never have understood before. The hunger inside me, the gnawing emptiness that had driven me to return, was satisfied now, but it was also growing, expanding, filling every corner of my being. The figure, tall and impossibly thin, stood just beyond the altar, its ember eyes burning brighter with each passing second. It had been waiting for me, and now, it was as much a part of me as the forest itself. I could feel its presence in my mind, a dark whisper that echoed in the back of my thoughts. It was no longer just watching me. It was guiding me, pulling me deeper into the forest, deeper into its ancient heart. I didn't resist. I couldn't. The hunger, the whispers, the pull, they were all part of me now, and I followed them willingly, eagerly, as though I had always known this was my fate. The symbols on the trees, the ground, the air, they all led me, marking the path as I walked, each one glowing with an unnatural light, brighter and more urgent as I moved. The trees closed in around me, their branches reaching out like arms, brushing against my skin, as though they were welcoming me home. The wind howled, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, the roots twisting like serpents, guiding my every step. I didn't know how long I had been walking, but it didn't matter. Time had no meaning here. The forest had no boundaries. It was a place beyond the reach of the world I had known, a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. I had crossed over, and there was no going back. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were no longer just voices. They were thoughts, my thoughts, merging with the forest's ancient consciousness. The hunger within me twisted and writhed, a living thing that demanded more, always more. It was a part of the forest now, just as I was, and we were one. And then I saw it, the heart of the forest, a clearing, bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light, the ground covered in symbols, ancient and glowing, stretching out in every direction. At the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its bark blackened and twisted, its roots stretching deep into the earth. The tree was alive, its branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and at its base, there was a hole, dark and deep, like a mouth waiting to swallow the world. I knew what it was, the source of the forest's power, the wellspring of its hunger, and it was calling to me. I stepped forward, the hunger within me surging as I approached the tree. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single, unified voice, and I understood. The forest was not just alive, it was conscious. It was ancient, and it had been waiting for me, waiting for someone like me to return, to complete the cycle, to feed its insatiable hunger. I knelt before the tree, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the bark. The moment my fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through me, filling every fiber of my being. It was the forest's power, ancient and raw, and I could feel it awakening within me, merging with my soul. The hunger, the emptiness, it was gone, replaced by something far darker, far more consuming. The forest had claimed me, and I had claimed it. We were one, bound together in a way that defied understanding. The tree's roots began to stir, shifting and twisting, and the ground beneath me trembled. I could feel the forest's heartbeat, slow and steady, like the pulse of the earth itself. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I reached into the hole at the base of the tree, my hand sinking into the darkness. The moment my fingers touched the cold, damp earth, a rush of power flooded through me, and I could feel the forest's ancient hunger surge once more. It was alive, and it was hungry. It needed to feed, and I was the one who would feed it. I closed my eyes, and in that instant I understood. The forest had always been a part of me, and I had always been a part of it. The hunger, the whispers, the pull, it was all part of the cycle. The forest needed me, and I needed it. We were bound together forever. As I sank deeper into the darkness, the last of my humanity slipped away. The forest had claimed me, and I had become its heart. The hunger would never end. The whispers would never stop, and the forest would never let me go. The darkness around me deepened, swallowing the last remnants of the world I had known. My body trembled, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sensation of completion, of union. I was no longer just a person lost in the woods. I was part of the forest, as ancient and endless as the trees themselves. The hunger inside me had transformed into something more profound, more eternal. It wasn't a gnawing emptiness anymore. It was a vast, unquenchable thirst that coursed through my veins, an essential part of my new existence. I felt the roots of the great trees shifting beneath me, twisting like serpents, their presence as familiar as my own heartbeat. The tree, the forest, the very land around me, they were all aware of me, attuned to my every thought, my every breath. The symbols etched into the ground pulsed with an energy that seemed to flow through me, as if I were the conduit between the earth and the sky. The whispers, once faint and distant, now filled my mind with clarity. They weren't just voices, they were memories, fragments of every soul that had ever wandered into the forest, lost and consumed. Their stories mingled with mine, intertwining like the roots of the trees. They were here, with me, and I could hear them, feel them. I understood now that the forest didn't just consume, it preserved. Each lost soul was a part of the eternal cycle, their essence intertwined with the forest's power. I reached out, my hand trembling, and placed it against the gnarled trunk of the great tree. It was cold, but not in the way I had once feared. It was the cold of something ancient, timeless, and unyielding. The tree responded to my touch, its bark shifting, almost alive. I could feel it, the power coursing through it, and I realized that I wasn't just feeding the forest, I was becoming the forest. The hunger inside me flared, and I knew it was time. The forest needed to expand, to claim more, to grow beyond the boundaries of its ancient realm. And I would be its vessel, its guide. The figure, its ember eyes burning with the same hunger as mine, was no longer a distant watcher. It was by my side, its form dissolving into the shadows of the trees, its presence now a part of me. I stood, my legs no longer trembling with fear or exhaustion. There was no more need for fear. I was beyond it. I was part of the forest now. The symbols on the trees began to glow brighter, and I felt the pull to move, to leave the clearing and venture deeper into the woods. The time had come for the forest to spread, for its reach to extend beyond the dark boundaries it had once known. I walked, my steps slow and deliberate, each one in perfect sync with the pulse of the earth beneath me. The trees parted as I moved, their branches bowing in reverence. The air grew thick with an almost palpable energy, and the ground seemed to hum with life. I could feel the forest's power growing, its hunger stretching out like a dark wave, ready to consume everything in its path. As I walked, I could feel the presence of others who had wandered into the forest, lost like I once had been. Their whispers joined the chorus of voices in my mind, their souls drawn to the same inevitable fate. I reached out, calling to them, beckoning them to join me, to become part of the forest's eternal cycle. And they came, slowly at first, like shadows in the corner of my vision, their figures materializing from the darkness. They were the lost ones, the ones who had never made it out. Their eyes were empty, their faces hollow, but their souls were still there, still tethered to the forest. They walked with me, following me as I led them deeper into the woods, deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger surged within me again, but this time, it wasn't just for sustenance. It was for something more, something greater. The forest was awakening, and I was its herald, its guide, its chosen one. We were one now, the forest and I would lead it, guide it, until it consumed everything. The world beyond the trees would be nothing but a distant memory, a fading echo of what once was. I could hear the whispers of the lost souls growing louder now, their voices joining with mine, a chorus of despair and longing. They were with me, part of me, and together we would grow, we would spread. The forest would never be contained again. It would consume, it would spread, until it reached the edges of the world itself. The figure, my dark companion, appeared once more, its ember eyes burning with a hunger that matched my own. It didn't speak, but I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to lead. It wanted me to guide the forest, to bring the world to its knees. And I would. The forest had claimed me, and now I would claim the world. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a presence, a living, breathing entity that stretched far beyond the confines of what I had once known. The hunger that had begun as a gnawing emptiness now filled every corner of my being. And with each step I took, it grew stronger, more insistent. The forest pulsed around me, its roots and branches shifting in time with my heartbeat. The whispers of the lost souls were no longer distant echoes. They were my thoughts, my guiding voice, urging me forward. I could feel the presence of the others now, the lost ones who had wandered into the forest before me, their souls tethered to its endless hunger. They were with me, walking beside me, their forms flickering in and out of existence like shadows in the dim light. They were no longer the hollow, empty beings I had once feared. They were part of the forest, just as I was. The symbols, once scattered and chaotic, now glowed with an eerie, unified light. They pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the earth, guiding me, marking the path ahead. The trees parted as I moved, their branches bowing, as if acknowledging my power, my connection to the forest's ancient force. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to come alive, the air thick with the scent of decay and growth, of life and death intertwined. I could hear the figure behind me, its presence constant, a shadow that never left my side. Its ember eyes glowed faintly in the distance, a silent reminder of the power it had granted me, of the role it had set me on. I was no longer a lost soul. I was the forest's chosen, its guide, its heart. And now, I would lead it. As I walked, the ground beneath me shifted, the roots rising up to meet me, curling around my feet like welcoming arms. The trees, once so distant and silent, now seemed to whisper my name, their voices rising in unison with the whispers of the lost souls. I could feel the hunger growing, an insatiable need that stretched out beyond the trees, beyond the forest itself. The forest was calling to the world beyond, to those who had never known its power, its hunger. It was time to feed. It was time for the forest to expand, to claim more, to grow beyond its ancient boundaries. And I was the one who would make it happen. I reached the edge of the forest, the line where the trees stopped and the world beyond began. The ground here was different, harder, colder, as if the forest itself was hesitant to cross the boundary. But I knew it was only a matter of time. The forest would break through. It would claim the world, just as it had claimed me. I raised my hand, the symbols on my skin glowing faintly in the twilight. The trees around me began to tremble, their branches shaking as though awakening from a long slumber. The ground beneath me cracked, the earth splitting open to reveal the roots that had been growing deep beneath the surface. The forest was reaching out, its hunger stretching toward the horizon. The figure stepped forward, its ember eyes glowing brighter now, its form shifting in the darkness. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a presence, an extension of the forest itself. It stood beside me, its form towering, a dark silhouette against the glowing symbols that now covered the earth. The whispers of the lost souls rose to a crescendo, filling the air with their frantic, desperate cries. But I no longer felt their fear. I no longer felt the weight of their suffering. I was part of the forest now, and I understood. This was the cycle. The forest consumed, and in return, it gave life, life in the form of its endless hunger, its eternal power. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of decay and earth. The sky above darkened, clouds swirling as if the very heavens were bending to the will of the forest. The hunger surged within me again, and I knew it was time. The forest was ready to spread, to claim the world beyond, to consume everything in its path. I took a step forward, my hand outstretched toward the horizon. The earth trembled beneath me, the ground splitting open as the forest roots reached out, crawling across the land like a dark tide. The trees began to grow, their trunks twisting and stretching toward the sky, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, grasping for the world beyond. The hunger surged again, and I felt it in my bones, in every fiber of my being. The forest was alive, and it was hungry, and I was its vessel. As the trees spread, as the forest claimed the world, I could feel the presence of the figure beside me, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable need. The lost souls, once trapped in the forest, now joined the growing chorus, their voices rising in unison with the forest call. And I understood. This was how it had always been. The forest consumed. It grew, it fed, and in return, it gave life. Life to those who had been lost, to those who had wandered into its embrace. The cycle would never end. The hunger would never cease. And I would never leave. The forest had claimed me, and now it was time for the world to be consumed. The hunger had begun. The world trembled beneath the weight of the forest's hunger, as its roots clawed deeper into the earth, twisting and growing, seeking to claim everything in its path. The trees surged upward, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like dark, hungry fingers, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay and earth. The once quiet whispers of the lost souls had become a cacophony, their voices rising in unison with the forest's call, a chorus of agony and longing, beckoning the living to join them in the endless dark. I felt the power of the forest coursing through me, a surge of energy that made my heart race, made my blood burn. The hunger, the need, it was all-consuming, like a fire that could never be quenched. I had become part of it, part of the forest's eternal cycle. There was no escape. There was only the forest, and the forest had claimed me. As I stood at the edge of the forest, watching the trees grow and stretch toward the horizon, I felt a shift in the air. The wind, once wild and howling, now stilled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I turned, and the figure was there, standing beside me. Its amber eyes glowed brighter now, burning with an intensity that matched the hunger inside me. It didn't speak, but I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to lead. It wanted me to guide the forest, to bring the world to its knees. I nodded, my body moving on its own, as if the forest itself was guiding me. The figure stepped forward, its form flickering and shifting like a shadow, and the ground beneath us trembled. The air grew heavy with the weight of the forest's power, and I could feel the earth beneath my feet beginning to crack, the roots reaching out, spreading like a dark tide. The forest was growing, expanding, its reach stretching farther than I had ever imagined. The trees were no longer just trees. They were sentient, alive, aware. They moved and twisted, their branches curling and reaching for the world beyond, their roots tearing through the earth, pulling everything into the forest's dark embrace. I could feel the presence of the lost souls all around me now, their whispers growing louder, their voices frantic. They were no longer just echoes in my mind. They were here, walking beside me, their forms flickering in and out of existence, their souls bound to the forest's insatiable hunger. They were the forest children, just as I was. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay, and I could hear the distant sound of something else, something that had been waiting, something that had been calling to the forest for so long. It was a deep, guttural sound, a growl that reverberated through the trees, shaking the ground beneath me. It was the sound of something ancient, something powerful, something that had been slumbering for centuries. The figure beside me stirred, its ember eyes flickering, and I knew that the time had come. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was ready to claim everything. The ritual had begun, and there was no turning back. The trees shifted, their trunks twisting and groaning, as if they were awakening from a long slumber. The symbols on the ground glowed brighter, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. I raised my hand, and the forest responded, the roots beneath me shifting and writhing like serpents, tearing through the earth. The ground cracked open, and I saw it, the source of the forest's power. A massive stone altar, covered in the same symbols that had guided me through the woods. The altar was ancient, older than the trees themselves, and it pulsed with an energy that was both terrifying and intoxicating. It was the heart of the forest, the source of its hunger, and it was calling to me. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the earth as the roots wrapped around my ankles, pulling me toward the altar. The whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices a maddening chorus in my mind. They were desperate now, urging me to hurry, to finish the ritual, to complete the cycle. I placed my hands on the altar, and the power surged through me. It was like nothing I had ever felt before, a raw, unfiltered energy that filled me, consumed me. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, and the ground beneath me trembled, as if the very earth itself was alive, responding to the ritual. The figure appeared beside me once more, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. It reached out, its long, twisted fingers brushing against my skin, and I felt a jolt of energy shoot through me. The forest, the altar, the hunger, it was all connected, all part of the same cycle, and I was the key. I closed my eyes, and the world around me seemed to fade away. The forest, the altar, the figure, all of it melted into a single, overwhelming presence. I was no longer just a person. I was part of the forest, part of the hunger, part of the endless cycle of life and death. The ritual was complete. The forest had claimed me, and now it would claim everything. The hunger was no longer just a desire. It was a force, a living entity that stretched beyond the boundaries of the woods, reaching for the world beyond. The trees, the roots, the symbols, they all pulsed with the same energy the same hunger, and I knew that there was no stopping it now. The forest was awake, and it was hungry. The moment the ritual completed, a strange stillness fell over the forest. The wind ceased its howling, the whispers of the lost souls dimmed, and for a fleeting moment, everything was suspended in an eerie calm. But I knew, deep down, that this calm was the quiet before the storm. The hunger had been unleashed, and there was no turning back. I stood at the altar, feeling the power surge through me, coursing through my veins like a torrent of fire. The forest itself seemed to breathe beneath me, its roots pulsing with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. The figure beside me, its ember eyes glowing with a malevolent satisfaction, watched me with a strange intensity. It didn't need to speak. I could feel its approval, its hunger, and its anticipation. The ground beneath me trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the forest. It was the world. The earth shook with the reverberations of the ritual, as if the boundaries between the forest and the rest of the world had thinned, the veil separating them tearing apart. The trees groaned, their trunks creaking as if they were stretching, growing, expanding. And then it began. The roots of the forest, once buried deep in the earth, began to rise. Slowly at first, then faster, as if they were reaching for something, grasping for the world beyond. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches bending unnaturally, stretching toward the horizon. The forest was spreading, its hunger reaching out, its roots tearing through the earth like veins, seeking to claim everything. I could feel the pull, the force of the forest's power, urging me to move with it. I stepped forward, and the earth seemed to part beneath my feet, the ground opening up like a mouth, swallowing me whole. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the once familiar sounds of the forest were now a symphony of groans, whispers, and distant howls. The figure moved beside me, its presence ever looming, its ember eyes never leaving me. The world outside the forest was already changing. The once clear sky had darkened, clouds swirling as if drawn into the pull of the forest's hunger. The trees were no longer just trees. They were alive, sentient, and they reached beyond the boundaries of the forest, their roots tearing through the ground, pulling the earth apart. The forest was claiming the land, growing, expanding, its influence spreading like a disease. I could hear the cries of people now, distant voices, muffled by the growing power of the forest. The forest had begun its feast, and the world outside was its first course. The hunger was insatiable, and it would not stop until everything had been consumed. I felt the pull of the forest, the weight of its desire, its need. It was calling me, urging me to lead, to guide it as it devoured the world. The lost souls, once trapped in the forest, were now free, their voices joining the chorus of hunger, their forms flickering in and out of existence, as if they were still tethered to the forest's dark heart. The figure moved ahead of me, its ember eyes glowing brighter with each step. It was leading me deeper into the heart of the forest, to the place where the power was strongest, where the hunger was most intense. I followed, my legs moving as if controlled by the forest itself, my body no longer my own. I was part of the forest now, its vessel, its guide. And then I saw it. The heart of the forest, the source of its power, stood before me. It was a massive, gnarled tree, its trunk twisted and knotted with ancient roots that stretched deep into the earth. The air around it crackled with energy, and the symbols that had guided me through the woods now glowed brightly, pulsing with an unnatural light. This was the heart of the forest, the place where the hunger began and where it would end. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the bark of the tree, and the power surged through me once more. The hunger, the desire, it was overwhelming, and I could feel the forest's power wrapping around me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes glowing brighter, its presence filling the air with a suffocating weight. And then I heard it, a voice, low and guttural, rising from the depths of the tree. It was a voice that seemed to echo through the very earth itself, a voice that carried with it the weight of centuries, of an ancient hunger that had been waiting patient and unyielding for this moment. It is time. The words reverberated through me, filling me with a sense of inevitability. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a force, a living entity, and it had chosen me to be its vessel, its guide, its heart. The hunger was no longer just a desire. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was ready to feed. The ground beneath me cracked open, and the roots of the ancient tree began to rise, twisting and writhing like serpents, reaching for the sky. The forest was no longer contained within its boundaries. It was breaking free, spreading across the land, consuming everything in its path. The figure beside me moved, its ember eyes never leaving me. It stepped forward, its form flickering like a shadow, and I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to lead, to guide the forest's hunger as it consumed the world. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the forest's power coursing through me, and I stepped forward. The roots of the tree rose higher, and the world trembled beneath the force of the forest's hunger. The figure followed, its ember eyes glowing brighter, its form ever present. And together, we began the feast. The forest had awakened, and there would be no stopping it now. The hunger was insatiable, and it would not rest until everything had been consumed. The world, the people, the land, nothing would be spared. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. The forest's hunger was like a living thing, a beast that could not be sated, an insatiable force that surged through the earth, tearing apart everything in its path. As I walked deeper into the heart of the woods, the ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with energy, as if the very soil was alive, feeding off the darkness that surrounded us. The ancient tree, its gnarled roots twisting upward, seemed to breathe with the forest. Its bark was rough, its surface covered in 1,000 symbols, each one glowing with an eerie light, pulsing with the same rhythm as my own heartbeat. The whispers of the lost souls had become a constant hum in the air, their voices now a part of the forest's song, woven into the very fabric of the woods. The figure beside me, its ember eyes burning with an unholy hunger, moved with purpose. It was no longer just a shadow in the distance. It was my guide, my companion in this ritual, the one who had led me here to this moment. It spoke without words, its presence filling the air with a sense of inevitability, as if everything had been set in motion long before I had even stepped into the forest. The air grew thicker, heavier, and I could feel the weight of the forest's power pressing down on me. The trees around us seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisting and creaking, as if they were reaching out to touch me, to claim me. The roots beneath me shifted, moving like serpents, curling around my legs, pulling me deeper into the forest's embrace. I could hear the distant cries of the world outside, the faint sounds of people screaming, of buildings collapsing, of the earth itself trembling beneath the weight of the forest's hunger. It was spreading, consuming everything in its path, and there was no escape. The symbols on the trees began to shift, their shapes changing, their lines twisting into new forms. They seemed to be alive, growing and evolving, as if they were part of the forest, part of the ritual that had begun long before I had even set foot in these woods. The whispers grew louder, their voices a maddening chorus, urging me forward, urging me to complete the cycle. I could feel it now, the pull of the force that had been drawing me in, guiding me, shaping me into something new. I wasn't just a person anymore. I was part of the forest, part of the hunger, part of the endless cycle of life and death. I could feel the power coursing through my veins, the energy of the earth itself moving within me, filling me with an overwhelming sense of purpose. The figure beside me stopped, its ember eyes fixed on me. It was waiting for me to take the next step, to complete the ritual. I knew what I had to do. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the ancient tree, and the power surged through me, a torrent of energy that filled me, consumed me. The symbols on the tree glowed brighter, their light searing into my vision, and I felt the earth tremble beneath me. The roots of the tree twisted, curling around me, pulling me closer to the heart of the forest. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the lost souls now a cacophony of screams and wails. They were trapped in the forest, bound to its hunger, and they were begging for release. But there was no release. There was only the forest and its hunger. I closed my eyes, feeling the power of the forest fill me, and I knew that there was no turning back. The ritual had been set into motion, and I was its instrument, its vessel. The hunger was within me now, and I could feel it growing, spreading, consuming everything in its path. I opened my eyes, and the figure was standing before me, its ember eyes burning with an intensity that matched the hunger inside me. It reached out, its long, twisted fingers brushing against my skin, and I felt a jolt of energy shoot through me. The forest responded, its roots shifting and writhing, its branches reaching for the sky. And then I heard it, the sound of something ancient, something powerful, something that had been waiting for this moment. The ground beneath me cracked open, and I saw it, the heart of the forest, the source of its power. It was a massive, blackened stone covered in the same symbols that had guided me through the woods. It pulsed with an eerie, unnatural light, and I knew that this was the source of the forest's hunger, the place where it all began. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the earth, and I placed my hands on the stone. The power surged through me once more, a torrent of energy that filled me, consumed me. The hunger was no longer just a force. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was alive within me. The figure stepped forward, its ember eyes glowing brighter, its form flickering like a shadow. It reached out, its hand brushing against mine, and I felt the connection, the bond between us, the bond between the forest and me. We were one now, united in the hunger, in the power that flowed through the earth. And then I heard it, the voice of the forest, low and guttural, rising from the depths of the stone. It was a voice that carried with it the weight of centuries, a voice that had been waiting for this moment. The feast begins. The ground shook, and the roots of the forest surged upward, tearing through the earth, reaching for the sky. The trees groaned, their trunks twisting and creaking as they stretched toward the heavens. The symbols on the ground glowed brighter, their light pulsing with an unholy energy, and I knew that the forest was no longer just a place. It was a force, a living entity, and it was spreading, consuming everything in its path. I could hear the distant screams of the world outside, the cries of people trapped in the forest's hunger. The earth trembled beneath me, and I knew that there was no escape. The ritual was complete, and the forest had awakened. The hunger was insatiable, and it would not stop until everything had been consumed. The world would be swallowed whole. The forest roared around me, its hunger swelling as the trees stretched toward the sky like twisted fingers, clawing at the heavens. The air was thick with a palpable energy, an ancient, suffocating force that had been unleashed. I could feel it pulsing in my veins, an all-consuming presence that wrapped itself around my very soul. It wasn't just the forest anymore. It was me, and I was it. We were one, bound by the ritual, by the hunger that now flowed through us. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes flickering like dying stars, watching as the forest awakened. It was no longer just a shadow. It was something more, something ancient and powerful, a creature forged in the heart of the earth, born of the very hunger that had consumed everything before. And now, it was my guide, my partner in this new existence. I could hear the distant cries of the world outside, the faint screams of people who had no idea what was coming. The cities, the towns, the world itself, none of it mattered anymore. The forest was spreading, its roots burrowing into the earth, reaching for every corner of existence. It would consume everything. The hunger was unstoppable. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady as I moved toward the heart of the forest, toward the blackened stone that pulsed with an unnatural light. The symbols on the ground shimmered beneath my feet, their edges glowing brighter with each step I took. The whispers of the lost souls were louder now, their voices a chorus of agony and longing, filling the air with a maddening hum. The stone was cold to the touch, its surface slick with a dark, viscous substance that seemed to move of its own accord. I placed my hands on it once more, and the power surged through me, a torrent of energy that shattered my senses. The forest responded, its roots thrashing beneath the ground, and I felt the earth tremble beneath my feet. The figure beside me reached out, its long, twisted fingers brushing against the stone, and for a moment, everything stilled. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation, and then the voice of the forest spoke again, low and guttural, rising from the depths of the stone like an ancient chant. It is time. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, something stirred. A dark, writhing mass of roots and shadows. A creature born of the forest's hunger rose from the earth like a serpent unfurling its coils. Its form was indistinct, a shifting, ever-changing mass of darkness and energy, but its eyes, those ember eyes, burned through the shadows, glowing with an insatiable hunger. It was the heart of the forest, the source of its power, and it had been waiting. I could feel its presence in my mind, a cold, suffocating force that pressed against my thoughts, urging me to join it, to become one with it. The hunger was overwhelming, but I had already given myself to it. There was no turning back now. The creature's gaze locked with mine, and I felt its power surge through me, filling me with a terrible, intoxicating sense of purpose. The figure beside me stepped forward, its form flickering like a fading shadow, and it placed a hand on the writhing mass. The creature's eyes turned to it, and I could feel the bond between them, a connection forged in the depths of the forest's hunger. It was the figure's will that had brought me here, had guided me to this moment. And now it was time to finish what had been started. The creature's form twisted, its dark tendrils reaching out to encircle us. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, the very earth seeming to groan in pain as the ritual reached its climax. The whispers of the lost souls became a cacophony, a maddening chorus of voices that filled the air with a terrible, all-consuming sound. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the creature's eyes flared bright, and the forest exploded into motion. The roots surged upward, tearing through the earth, breaking apart everything in their path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches clawing at the sky as the hunger spread outward, consuming everything. The world outside the forest was no longer safe. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. I could feel it. We could feel it. The forest hunger spreading, consuming, devouring. It was no longer a place. It was a force, a living, breathing entity that would not stop until everything was swallowed whole. And I was its chosen vessel. The figure beside me turned, its ember eyes burning with a terrible, unholy light. It reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, searing through my very soul. The hunger was within me, and I could feel it, gnawing at the edges of my mind, urging me forward. The forest had claimed me, and there was no escaping it. The hunger would not stop, and neither would I. The air was thick with the forest's power, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on everything, even the sky. The trees were no longer just trees. They were twisted sentinels, their bark like cracked, ancient skin, and their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, eager to pull everything into the depths of the forest. The ground beneath me pulsed with the rhythm of something alive, something ancient and hungry, and I could feel it in my bones, my very blood. We were one now, the forest and I. The hunger was mine, as much a part of me as my breath. I could hear the distant cries of the world beyond the trees, the last remnants of a civilization that hadn't yet realized its fate. The winds carried their desperation, their fear, but it was already too late. The forest was growing, expanding, its roots stretching deeper into the earth, its branches reaching further into the sky. It was consuming everything, and nothing would escape its grasp. The figure, its ember eyes burning with a terrible, insatiable hunger, moved beside me, its form flickering like a shadow in the dim light. It was no longer just a guide. It was something more, something that had always been, something that had always waited for this moment. And now, it was my guide, my partner in the forest's terrible hunger. Together, we moved deeper into the heart of the forest, the path ahead illuminated only by the faint, eerie glow of the symbols that had begun to cover the ground, the trees, the very air. They pulsed with life, a rhythm that matched the beating of my own heart. Each symbol was a part of the ritual, each one a thread in the tapestry of the forest's power. They were everywhere now, on the trees, the rocks, the ground, even in the air, as if the very atmosphere was woven with the forest's hunger. I could feel the weight of the forest gaze on me, 1,000 eyes watching, waiting. The whispers of the lost souls had become a constant hum in the air, their voices now a part of the forest song, woven into the very fabric of the woods. They were lost, trapped in the hunger, and they would never escape. Neither would I. The figure beside me stopped, its ember eyes fixed on something in the distance. I followed its gaze, and my heart skipped a beat. There, at the center of the clearing, was the heart of the forest, the source of its power, the massive, blackened stone covered in the same symbols that had guided me here. It pulsed with an unnatural light, its surface slick with a dark, viscous substance that seemed to move of its own accord. The stone was alive, and it was calling to me. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the earth as if the ground itself were eager to embrace me. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel the weight of the forest's power pressing down on me. The roots beneath me shifted, writhing like serpents, and the whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices a maddening chorus of agony and longing. I reached out, my hands trembling as I touched the stone. The power surged through me, a torrent of energy that filled every fiber of my being, searing through my veins like fire. The stone responded, its surface rippling as if it were alive, its power coursing through the earth, through the trees, through me. The figure stepped beside me, its long, twisted fingers brushing against the stone. The air crackled with energy, and I felt the ground tremble beneath us. The forest was alive, and it was feeding, growing, expanding. The hunger was unstoppable, and I was its vessel. The creature, the heart of the forest, rose from the stone, its form shifting and writhing, a mass of darkness and energy, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. It was no longer just a presence. It was real, and it was waiting for me to complete the final step. I could feel the hunger in me, gnawing at my thoughts, at my very soul. It was a part of me now, and there was no turning back. The figure beside me spoke without words, its presence filling the air with a sense of inevitability. It was time. The creature's dark tendrils reached out, curling around us, and the world seemed to shift. The earth cracked open, and from the depths of the stone, the roots surged upward, tearing through the ground, wrapping around everything, pulling everything into the heart of the forest. The air was thick with power, and the whispers of the lost souls reached a crescendo, their voices now a deafening roar. And then I felt it, the hunger. It was no longer just the forest hunger. It was mine. I stepped forward, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the creature. The darkness enveloped me, the hunger coursing through me, filling me with a terrible, intoxicating power. The world around me blurred, the forest spinning into a vortex of light and shadow, and I felt myself falling, sinking into the very heart of the hunger. The whispers of the lost souls faded, and all that remained was the hunger. It was alive, it was real, and it was within me. The forest had claimed me, and now I was its hunger. The forest was no longer a place, it was a living entity, and I was its heartbeat. The hunger that had once clawed at the edges of my mind now filled every inch of my being, a burning fire that consumed everything in its path. The air was thick with it, the very ground beneath me trembling as the roots stretched deeper into the earth, the trees reaching higher into the sky. The forest was growing, expanding, and with it we were growing too. The creature, the heart of the forest, loomed before me, its ember eyes glowing with an unholy light. It was no longer just a shadow, no longer just a figure in the dark. It was me, and I was it. We were bound by the hunger, by the ritual, by the ancient power that pulsed through the very earth. It had taken everything, my mind, my body, my soul, and in return, it had given me something far worse, the knowledge of what was to come. The forest was awakening, but it wasn't just the trees that were alive. The ground beneath me began to shift, the soil rising in undulating waves, as if the very earth itself was breathing. The roots of the trees twisted and curled like serpents, reaching out to claim everything in their path. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of something ancient and long forgotten, and the whispers of the lost souls that had once roamed the earth filled the air. Their voices had become one with the forest, a constant hum of agony and longing. I could hear them now, their cries echoing in my mind, a chorus of voices that stretched back through time, through the ages. They had been the first to fall to the hunger, the first to be consumed by the forest's insatiable appetite. And now, they were part of it. They were the forest, just as I was. I looked down at my hands, my skin pale and cold, my fingers twitching as if they were no longer my own. The journal was still clutched in my grasp, the pages now filled with new entries, new symbols, new drawings that seemed to shift and change with every passing second. I had become part of the forest story, and it was rewriting itself through me. The figure, the guide, stood beside me, its ember eyes fixed on the horizon, where the edge of the forest met the world beyond. It had no need to speak. It was the forest made flesh, and I was its instrument. Together, we would bring the hunger to the world. I turned toward the heart of the forest, the blackened stone that had once been the source of its power. It pulsed now with an even greater intensity, the symbols glowing brighter, the darkness deeper. It was the center of everything, the nexus of the forest's terrible hunger. And it was calling me. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the earth as if the ground itself was eager to claim me. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel the hunger growing inside me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. It was time to finish what had been started, to bring the forest's hunger to the world, to consume everything. The creature's eyes locked with mine, and I felt its power surge through me, a torrent of energy that filled every fiber of my being. The forest responded, its roots surging upward, tearing through the earth, its branches reaching higher into the sky. The hunger was spreading, and nothing would stop it. I could hear the distant sounds of the world beyond, the last remnants of civilization still clinging to life. But they were already too late. The forest was closing in, its roots burrowing into the earth, its branches stretching across the sky. It was only a matter of time before it consumed everything. The hunger would not be denied. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the stone. The power surged through me, and I could feel the forest's heartbeat quicken, its hunger growing stronger. The stone was alive, and it was feeding on me, on my very essence. The hunger was within me, and I was within it. We were one. The figure beside me reached out, its fingers brushing against the stone, and the world seemed to shift. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath us trembled as the forest's power reached its peak. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices rising to a deafening roar, and I felt the forest's hunger surge, filling every corner of the world with its insatiable appetite. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the forest exploded into motion. The roots surged upward, tearing through the earth, breaking apart everything in their path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches clawing at the sky as the hunger spread outward, consuming everything in its path. The world outside the forest was no longer safe. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. I could feel it, we could feel it, the forest's hunger spreading, consuming, devouring. It was no longer a place. It was a force, a living, breathing entity that would not stop until everything was swallowed whole. And I was its chosen vessel. The figure beside me turned, its ember eyes burning with a terrible, unholy light. It reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, searing through my very soul. The hunger was within me, and I could feel it, gnawing at the edges of my mind, urging me forward. The forest had claimed me, and there was no escaping it. The hunger would not stop, and neither would I. The world around me was dissolving into chaos, a swirling vortex of shadows and light as the forest expanded, its roots tearing through the earth, its branches reaching out to claim everything. The hunger was everywhere, a force so vast, so all-encompassing, that nothing could escape it. The creatures of the world, the people, the cities, the towns, none of them stood a chance. The forest had awakened, and it was no longer bound by its ancient limits. It was free, and it was hungry. I could feel the power coursing through me, the forest's energy surging in my veins, a fire that burned through every fiber of my being. The figure beside me, the guide, was no longer just a shadow, no longer just a part of the forest. It was my reflection, a twisted version of myself, a manifestation of the hunger that had claimed us both. Its ember eyes burned with a light that was not of this world, and I could feel its presence in every corner of my mind. Together, we were the forest. Together, we would bring its hunger to the world. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the ground beneath me shifting as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth like serpents. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices a constant hum, a chorus of agony and longing. They had been consumed, swallowed by the hunger, and now they were part of the forest, just as I was. We were all bound by it now, and there was no escaping its reach. I turned toward the center of the forest, where the blackened stone pulsed with an unnatural light. The symbols that had once guided me here now glowed brighter, their edges sharp and jagged, as if they were tearing at the very fabric of reality. The stone was alive, its power growing stronger with every passing second. It was the heart of the forest, the source of its hunger, and it was calling me. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the earth as the ground trembled beneath me. The air grew heavier, thick with the power of the forest, and I could feel the hunger gnawing at my thoughts, urging me forward. I was no longer just a witness. I was part of it. I was its vessel. The figure moved beside me, its presence a constant weight at my side, its amber eyes never leaving the stone. It reached out, its long fingers brushing against the surface of the stone, and I felt the power surge through me once again. The stone rippled like water, its surface shifting and changing, and I knew that the ritual was nearing its end. The hunger was about to be unleashed. The ground beneath me cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, the roots of the forest surged upward, tearing through the soil, wrapping around everything in their path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out like claws, eager to pull everything into the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of rot, of something ancient and forgotten, and I could feel the weight of the forest's power pressing down on me, suffocating me. But I didn't care. I welcomed it. The hunger was within me, and I was ready to embrace it. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the stone, and I felt a surge of power unlike anything I had ever known. The stone pulsed beneath my touch, its energy flowing through me, filling me with the forest's terrible hunger. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath me as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth, tearing apart everything in their path. The world was collapsing, and I was at the center of it. I could feel the whispers of the lost souls growing louder, their voices a maddening chorus of agony and despair. They were part of the forest now, just as I was. The hunger had claimed them, and it had claimed me. The figure beside me reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, searing through my soul. The hunger was inside me now, a fire that burned through every part of me, consuming everything. The world around me was fading, slipping away, and I knew that there was no turning back. The forest had claimed me, and I was its chosen vessel. The stone beneath my hand cracked open, and from within it, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path, and I could feel it reaching into my very soul, tearing at the edges of my being. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable hunger, and I knew that it was no longer just a guide. It was me, and I was it. We were one, bound by the hunger, bound by the forest. Together, we would consume everything. Together, we would bring the hunger to the world. The forest was alive, and it would never stop. The world around me was unraveling, the fabric of reality itself stretching and distorting as the forest's power surged through every living thing. The hunger had taken root in my soul, and now it was everywhere. It was in the air, in the ground, in the whispers that filled my mind. The trees bent and groaned, their roots slithering through the earth, seeking to break free of their ancient prison. The forest was no longer a place. It was a force, a living, breathing entity that stretched beyond the boundaries of the physical world. I could feel the pull of it, a magnetic force drawing me deeper into the heart of the forest, where the hunger was strongest. The stone pulsed beneath my hand, its dark energy seeping into my very bones, filling me with a terrible power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The figure, my reflection, stood beside me, its ember eyes burning with a hunger that mirrored my own. We were one now, bound by the forest's will, by the ancient hunger that had consumed everything in its path. The ground beneath me trembled, the earth splitting open as the roots of the forest surged upward, tearing through the soil, breaking apart everything in their path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, clawing at the sky. The air was thick with the scent of rot, of decay, and I could feel the weight of the forest's power pressing down on me, suffocating me. But there was no escape. There was no turning back. I was the forest now. The hunger was within me, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed everything. The world beyond the trees was already fading, slipping away like a dream, and I could feel the pull of the forest growing stronger, urging me forward. I had become part of it, part of the ritual, and there was no place left to run. The whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices a maddening chorus of agony and despair. They had been the first to fall to the hunger, the first to be consumed by the forest's insatiable appetite. And now, they were part of it. They were the forest just as I was. The figure beside me reached out, its long fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, a surge of energy that filled me with a terrible clarity. The hunger was no longer just a feeling. It was a presence, a force that had taken root deep within my soul. I could hear its voice now, low and guttural, echoing in my mind, urging me to give in, to surrender completely. Let go. Embrace the hunger. Become one with the forest. The stone beneath my hand cracked open, and from within it, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path, and I could feel it pulling at the very core of my being. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes fixed on the horizon, where the edge of the forest met the world beyond. It was waiting for me, just as it had always been. I was the final piece of the puzzle, the last vessel needed to complete the ritual. The hunger had claimed me, and now it would claim everything else. I took a step forward, my feet sinking into the earth as the roots of the forest reached out to claim me. The air grew thick with power, the ground trembling beneath me as the forest's energy surged upward, tearing apart everything in its path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches clawing at the sky, and I could feel the hunger growing stronger, spreading outward, consuming everything in its path. The world beyond the forest was no longer safe. The hunger was spreading, and there was no stopping it. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices rising to a deafening roar, and I could feel the power of the forest surging through me, urging me forward. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the stone, and I felt the power surge through me once again. The stone pulsed beneath my touch, its energy flowing through me, filling me with the forest's terrible hunger. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath me as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth, tearing apart everything in their path. The world was collapsing, and I was at the center of it. I could feel the whispers of the lost souls growing louder, their voices a maddening chorus of agony and despair. They were part of the forest now, just as I was. The hunger had claimed them, and it had claimed me. The figure beside me reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, searing through my soul. The hunger was inside me now, a fire that burned through every part of me, consuming everything. The world around me was fading, slipping away, and I knew that there was no turning back. The forest had claimed me, and I was its chosen vessel. The stone beneath my hand cracked open, and from within it, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path, and I could feel it reaching into my very soul, tearing at the edges of my being. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable hunger, and I knew that it was no longer just a guide. It was me, and I was it. We were one, bound by the hunger, bound by the forest. Together, we would consume everything. Together, we would bring the hunger to the world. The forest was alive, and it would never stop. The forest was no longer a place. It had become a living, breathing entity, a vast and endless expanse that stretched beyond the boundaries of time and space. The hunger within me grew stronger with each passing moment, a force that pulsed through my veins like fire, searing through every part of my being. I was no longer just a vessel. I was the forest's heartbeat, its pulse, its hunger made flesh. The figure beside me, my reflection, moved with me, its ember eyes never leaving mine. We were one now, bound by the same terrible force, the same insatiable hunger. It was no longer a guide. It was a part of me, a manifestation of the darkness that had claimed us both. We had become the embodiment of the forest's will, and there was no escape. The world beyond the trees was fading, slipping away into the darkness. The hunger had consumed everything in its path, and now it was spreading, reaching beyond the forest, beyond the boundaries of the earth. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath my feet trembled as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth like twisted serpents. I could feel the whispers of the lost souls filling the air, their voices rising in a maddening chorus of agony and despair. They had been the first to fall, the first to be claimed by the hunger. And now, they were part of it. They were the forest, just as I was. We were all bound by it now, part of its eternal cycle. The stone at the heart of the forest pulsed with dark energy, its surface crackling with power. The symbols that had once guided me here now glowed brighter, their edges sharp and jagged, like the teeth of some great beast. The stone was alive, its power growing stronger with every passing second, and I knew that the ritual was nearing its completion. The hunger was about to be unleashed upon the world. The figure beside me reached out, its long, skeletal fingers brushing against the stone, and I felt the energy surge through me, filling me with a terrible clarity. I was no longer just a witness. I was part of it. I was the hunger. The stone cracked open, revealing a dark, writhing mass of tendrils that surged upward, wrapping around everything in their path. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath me as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out like claws, eager to pull everything into the darkness. The whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices rising in a maddening crescendo. The hunger was here, and there was no escaping it. I took a step forward, my feet sinking into the earth as the roots of the forest reached out to claim me. The air was thick with power, the ground trembling beneath me as the forest's energy surged upward, tearing apart everything in its path. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches clawing at the sky, and I could feel the hunger growing stronger, spreading outward, consuming everything in its path. The world beyond the forest was no longer safe. The hunger was spreading, and there was no stopping it. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices rising to a deafening roar, and I could feel the power of the forest surging through me, urging me forward. The stone beneath my hand cracked open, and from within it, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path, and I could feel it pulling at the very core of my being. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the stone, and I felt the power surge through me once again. The stone pulsed beneath my touch, its energy flowing through me, filling me with the forest's terrible hunger. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath me as the roots of the forest surged upward, breaking through the earth, tearing apart everything in their path. The world was collapsing, and I was at the center of it. I could feel the whispers of the lost souls growing louder, their voices a maddening chorus of agony and despair. They were part of the forest now, just as I was. The hunger had claimed them, and it had claimed me. The figure beside me reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt a jolt of power shoot through me, searing through my soul. The hunger was inside me now, a fire that burned through every part of me, consuming everything. The world around me was fading, slipping away, and I knew that there was no turning back. The forest had claimed me, and I was its chosen vessel. The stone beneath my hand cracked open, and from within it, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the forest. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path, and I could feel it reaching into my very soul, tearing at the edges of my being. The figure stood beside me, its ember eyes burning with an insatiable hunger, and I knew that it was no longer just a guide. It was me, and I was it. We were one, bound by the hunger, bound by the forest. Together, we would consume everything. Together, we would bring the hunger to the world. The forest was alive, and it would never stop. The forest was alive, but it was no longer a forest. It had become something else entirely, a vast, endless entity that stretched beyond the physical world, beyond the boundaries of space and time. Its hunger was insatiable, and it had consumed me. I was no longer just a person, a lost soul wandering the woods. I was a part of it now, woven into its very fabric. The air was thick with power, heavy with the weight of everything that had been devoured, everything that had been lost to the hunger. The trees no longer whispered or groaned. They roared, their branches twisting and bending like the limbs of some ancient, writhing beast. The ground trembled beneath me, and the sky above was nothing but a dark void, the stars hidden behind a veil of shadows. I could feel the forest's heartbeat, a steady, pulsing rhythm that echoed through my bones. It was everywhere, beneath my feet, in the air I breathed, in the very blood that now coursed through my veins. The hunger was no longer a force I could control. It was me, and I was it. The figure beside me, my reflection, stayed silent, its ember eyes fixed on the horizon. It was waiting, just as it had always waited. We were bound together, two halves of the same terrible whole. The hunger had claimed us both, and now we would fulfill its purpose. The stone that had once been the source of the forest's power now pulsed with an otherworldly energy. Its surface cracked and split, revealing a dark, writhing mass of tendrils that seemed to stretch endlessly, like the roots of the forest reaching into the very heart of the world. It was here, at the heart of the forest, that the ritual would be completed, and when it was done, there would be nothing left but the hunger, an endless, all-consuming force that would devour everything. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the stone surface. The energy surged through me, flooding my body with a terrible power that filled every part of me, every thought, every breath. The hunger grew stronger, and I could feel it stretching outward, reaching beyond the forest, beyond the world. It was calling to everything, to every living thing that had ever existed, pulling them into its embrace. The figure beside me moved, its long, skeletal hand reaching out to touch the stone. I felt its power surge through me, a jolt of energy that sent a shiver down my spine. It was no longer a reflection. It was a part of me, a manifestation of the hunger that had taken root in my soul. Together, we stood, our eyes fixed on the horizon, on the edge of the forest, where the world beyond still existed. The hunger was growing, spreading, and it would not stop. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices rising in a cacophony of agony and despair. They were part of the forest now. Just as I was, we were all bound by it, consumed by it. And then the forest began to move. The ground shook beneath us, and the trees twisted and groaned, their branches stretching out like the limbs of some great, ancient beast. The air crackled with energy, and the sky above darkened, the stars hidden behind a thick veil of shadows. The hunger was reaching out, pulling at everything, consuming everything. The stone pulsed one final time, and with a deafening roar, the forest erupted. Roots shot up from the earth, tearing through the soil, breaking apart everything in their path. The trees bent and twisted, their branches reaching for the sky as if trying to tear the very heavens apart. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, a dark, writhing mass of tendrils surged upward, swallowing everything in their path. I could feel the power of the forest surging through me, filling me with a terrible clarity. The hunger had claimed everything. It had claimed the forest, the world, and now was claiming me. There was no escape. There was no turning back. The figure beside me turned, its ember eyes locking with mine. For a moment, I saw something flicker in its gaze, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. We were one now. We had always been one. And then the world shattered. The hunger had consumed everything. There was nothing left but the forest, its roots stretching into the very fabric of reality, its power spreading beyond the boundaries of the world. The darkness consumed everything, and I was a part of it. I was the forest now, and the hunger would never stop. The world was gone. There was no sky, no earth, no time. Just the endless, suffocating darkness, thick with the pulse of the forest's hunger. It had consumed everything, the world, the people, the very fabric of existence. There was no escape, no place to hide. All that remained was the endless void and the hunger that coursed through it, through me. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in the deepest recesses of my soul. The forest had become a part of me, and I had become a part of it. The hunger was not just a force anymore. It was my essence, my purpose. The figure beside me, my reflection, was no longer separate. It was me, and I was it. Together, we had become the forest's vessel, its heartbeat, its hunger made flesh. But even in this emptiness, I could sense something. A flicker, a whisper in the dark. A pulse, faint but unmistakable. It was a memory, a remnant of the world that had been. I remembered the people, the ones I had left behind, the ones I had failed. I remembered their faces, their voices, their laughter. I remembered the warmth of the sun, the feel of the wind on my skin. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of what I had lost, the weight of what the forest had taken. And in that moment, something shifted. The hunger that had once consumed me now felt distant, like a shadow retreating from the light. But there was no time for reflection. The hunger was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, urging me forward. I could feel the forest stretching out before me, its roots burrowing deeper into the fabric of reality. It was not done. It would never be done. The hunger was eternal, and it would keep feeding, keep growing, until there was nothing left. I moved forward, my body moving without thought, as if pulled by some unseen force. The darkness parted before me, revealing the twisted, gnarled trees of the forest. They reached out with their skeletal limbs, their branches clawing at the air like hungry fingers. The ground beneath me was soft and damp, the soil alive with the roots of the forest, writhing and twisting like serpents. The whispers were louder now, the voices of the lost souls who had been consumed by the hunger. I could hear them calling out, their cries echoing through the forest. They were part of it now, just as I was. The hunger had claimed them, and it would claim everything. I stepped forward, my feet sinking into the soft earth. The forest stretched out before me, an endless expanse of darkness and hunger. But in the distance, I saw something, a flicker of light, a faint glow that seemed to pulse with life. It was a symbol, one I recognized. The same symbol that had led me here, the one that had guided me through the forest. I moved toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The hunger surged within me, urging me to stop, to turn away. But I couldn't. I had to see it, had to understand. I had to know if there was a way out, a way to end this. The symbol grew larger as I approached, its edges glowing with a faint, eerie light. It was carved into the bark of a massive tree, its roots twisting around the base like the coils of a great serpent. The air around it was thick with power, and I could feel the energy pulsing through the forest, thrumming beneath my feet. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the tree. The moment I touched it, a jolt of energy shot through me, searing through my veins like fire. The forest trembled, its roots writhing in response. And then I saw it, the figure. It stood before me, taller than any tree, its ember eyes burning with an unquenchable hunger. It was no longer just a shadow in the distance, no longer just a reflection of me. It was alive, its form shifting and writhing like smoke, its limbs stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. It was the forest's heart, its soul, and it was waiting for me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It tilted its head, its ember eyes fixed on mine, as if studying me. And then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, it spoke. "You cannot escape." The words echoed through the forest, reverberating in my mind, in my very being. The hunger surged within me, a force that threatened to tear me apart. I was no longer just a person. I was the forest. I was the hunger, and there was no turning back. The figure stepped forward, its limbs twisting as it moved. It reached out, its fingers brushing against my face, and I felt the darkness, the emptiness, the hunger fill me completely. I was consumed by it, lost to it, and in that moment I understood the hunger was not something that could be defeated. It was not something that could be escaped. It was eternal, an unending force that would never stop, never rest. It would consume everything. It would consume me. The figure's ember eyes burned brighter, and the forest trembled in response. The roots of the trees surged upward, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the earth. The whispers of the lost souls filled the air, their voices rising in a maddening chorus of agony and despair. And then, everything went dark. I was the forest now, and the hunger would never stop. The darkness was all-encompassing, thick and oppressive, but within it, I could still feel the pulse. The heartbeat of the forest. The hunger. It was no longer just something outside of me. It was me. It was inside every fiber of my being, threading through my thoughts, my memories, my very essence. I was part of it now, as much a part of the forest as the roots that tangled beneath the earth or the gnarled trees that reached toward the sky. But there was something else too. A flicker of resistance, a whisper of something I had once been, a memory of light, of warmth, of life. It felt so distant now, like a dream fading in the morning light, but it was still there, buried beneath the hunger, beneath the darkness. I could feel it trying to break through, trying to remind me of who I had been before the forest had claimed me. For a moment, I thought I might be able to fight it, to break free. But the hunger was too strong, too consuming. It was not just a force. It was a presence, an entity that had existed long before I had ever set foot in its grasp. And it was not done with me. The forest shifted around me, its roots twisting and turning, its trees groaning and creaking in the distance. The whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices merging into a maddening cacophony. I could hear their agony, their desperation. They had all been claimed by the hunger, just as I had. And then I felt it, a tug, deep within me. A call. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. A memory, a voice I had once known. It was faint, but it was there. It was calling me. I followed it, instinctively, as if some part of me, some flicker of the person I had been, still had the strength to fight. The forest seemed to shift around me as I moved, the trees bending and warping, the ground beneath my feet shifting like the body of a great serpent. But I didn't stop. The voice was growing louder, clearer. It was coming from the heart of the forest, the very center. I pushed forward, my legs heavy with the weight of the hunger that clung to me. The whispers followed, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog, but I didn't listen to them. I couldn't. Not now. I had to reach it. I had to find the source of the call. The darkness began to thin, just a little. A faint light flickered in the distance, barely visible through the endless sea of trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give me hope. I pressed on, faster now, the hunger gnawing at my insides, urging me to stop, to give in. But I couldn't. Not when I was so close. I broke through the trees into a clearing. There at the center stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its form flickering like a mirage. But there was something familiar about it, something that made my heart race. It was me, not the reflection I had seen before, not the twisted, hunger-driven version of myself. No, this was me, the person I had been before the forest, before the hunger. My face, my eyes, my body, untouched by the forest's power. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, its presence surrounding me like a cloak. It was waiting. "You've come," the figure said, its voice a soft whisper, like a breeze through the trees. But it was clear, and it was mine. I knew you would. "Who? Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. The figure's lips curved into a faint smile. "I am the part of you that still remembers. The part that hasn't been consumed. The part that can still fight." I shook my head, confused. "But I am the forest now. I am the hunger." "No," the figure said gently. "You are not. Not entirely. The hunger is a part of you, yes, but it does not define you. You still have a choice." A choice? The words echoed in my mind. I had no choice. The hunger had taken me. It had consumed everything. There was no escaping it. "Do you remember what you came here for?" the figure asked, its eyes piercing into mine. I blinked, trying to focus. The memory was there, just out of reach. A feeling, a pull. Something deep within me had brought me here. To this clearing. To this moment. I came to stop it. I whispered, the words feeling strange on my tongue. "To end the hunger." The figure nodded. "You can, but it will come at a cost. The hunger is not just a force. It is a part of this world, as old as the earth itself. To sever its hold, you must sever your connection to it." I took a step back, my heart racing. "What does that mean?" "It means you must give up what the hunger has made you," the figure said, its voice soft but firm. "You must give up the power it has given you, the strength you now possess. You must choose to become human again." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Give up the hunger? The power? The control? The hunger that had become my very essence? But I can't. I am the forest now. I can't go back. "You can," the figure said, its gaze unwavering. "But it will be hard. You will feel its pull, its hunger for the rest of your days. It will never let you go completely, but you will have a chance to live again, to be human again." I closed my eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The hunger gnawed at me, demanding that I stay, that I embrace it, that I let it consume everything. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The hunger had taken everything from me. It had taken my past, my humanity. It had taken them. I could feel the pull of the hunger, its grip tightening on my soul. But I also felt something else, a flicker of light, of warmth, of hope. It was small, but it was there. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I stepped forward toward the figure. "I choose to fight," I whispered. The figure smiled, and for the first time, I felt something other than hunger fill my chest. A warmth, a light, a glimmer of what I had been. And then, the darkness shattered. The hunger screamed, but it was fading, slipping away. The forest trembled, its roots recoiling as the very earth itself seemed to sigh in relief. The trees groaned, their twisted branches straightening, their gnarled roots retreating. The whispers of the lost souls grew fainter, and the air grew lighter, less oppressive. I was no longer the forest. I was no longer the hunger. I was human again, and the forest was silent. The silence was almost deafening. For a moment, I stood there in the clearing, my breath shallow, my body trembling with the weight of what I had just done. The forest around me was still, eerily still. The wind had stopped, the whispers had faded, and the oppressive darkness that had once pressed against me seemed to lift, as though the very air had been purged of its malevolent presence. I could feel the weight of my own heartbeat in my chest, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness of the world around me. The hunger, that insatiable force that had been gnawing at me for so long, was gone. But in its place, there was something else, a deep, aching emptiness. I took a step forward, my legs unsteady beneath me, as if I hadn't used them in years. The ground felt solid beneath my feet. The familiar texture of the forest floor, damp, uneven, and real, was almost comforting. But I knew I could never truly return to the life I had once known. Not after everything I had seen, everything I had become. The figure, the reflection of myself, was gone. I didn't know if it had ever truly been there, or if it had simply been a manifestation of my own will, a final fragment of humanity that had guided me through the darkness. But now I was alone. I looked around the clearing. The symbols that had once marked the trees, the ground, the very air were gone. The forest had been stripped of its power, but I knew it wasn't truly over. The hunger had been severed, yes, but the forest itself still remained, ancient and alive, a part of the world that could never be fully erased. I had won, but at what cost? I stumbled forward, my mind still reeling from the decision I had made. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The path I had taken to reach this clearing was gone, swallowed up by the wilderness. It was as if the forest itself had closed behind me, sealing me in. I didn't know where to go now. The world outside the forest felt distant, unreachable. I had lost so much already, friends, family, my own sense of self, that the idea of returning to the world I had once known felt impossible. The forest had taken everything, and now it had left me behind, empty adrift. But I couldn't stay here. Not forever. I had to find a way out, a way back to the world I had lost. Or perhaps to a new world. A world where I could try to rebuild, to find peace. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The forest might have been silenced, but I knew it wasn't truly gone. It would always be there, lurking just beyond the edge of my consciousness, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in my resolve. The hunger might be gone, but the scars it had left on me would remain forever. But for now, I was free. I started walking, my steps slow but determined. The forest around me seemed to shift, the trees parting to reveal a path I hadn't seen before. It was narrow, overgrown, but it was there. A way out, a way forward. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever truly escape the shadow of the forest. But I knew one thing for certain. I had made my choice. I had fought, and I had won. The hunger had been defeated, and with it, the forest's grip on me. As I walked deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Not the hunger, not the creature that had haunted my every step, but something else. Something older. Something that had always been there, waiting, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The forest was no longer my prison. And maybe, just maybe, it would never be. The path ahead was uncertain, but I would walk it. I would face whatever came next, whatever shadows still lingered in the corners of my mind. Because I had learned something in the heart of that cursed forest. There is always a choice. And I had made mine. The path ahead grew darker, the trees thickening once more as if to reclaim what I had taken from them. The air was cooler now, heavier, and with every step, the weight of my past decisions pressed down on me like an invisible hand. The silence was no longer comforting. It felt oppressive, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break it. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but the sensation was too strong to ignore. It wasn't the hunger, not the thing that had haunted me through the forest for so long. No, this was different. This presence was older, deeper, and it was still there, lurking in the shadows, just out of reach. The path twisted and turned, the familiar feeling of disorientation creeping back into my mind. I tried to focus on the ground beneath my feet, the way the dirt shifted with each step, but it was hard to ignore the pull of the forest. The symbols, the strange markings that had once guided me deeper into the darkness, seemed to pulse beneath the earth now, as if they were waiting for me to make a mistake. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. The trees around me seemed to lean in, their branches stretching toward me like fingers reaching from the dark. The shadows moved, but there was no breeze, no wind to make them dance. They simply shifted, stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the forest take me again. I forced myself to walk faster, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks. The clearing, the place where I had severed the connection, was still fresh in my mind. I had thought that would be the end of it. I had thought that once the ritual was completed, the forest would release its grip on me, that I could go back to a life untouched by its horrors. But now, as I walked through the forest, I realized how naive I had been. The forest wasn't something that could be so easily escaped. It had marked me, claimed me, and even if I severed its hold, it would never truly let me go. The whispers began again, low and soft, like a distant murmur in the back of my mind. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were there. The hunger was gone, but something else was rising in its place, something darker, more insidious. A presence that I had failed to understand before, something tied to the very essence of the forest itself. I stumbled into a clearing, the trees parting in front of me like a veil. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it. The cabin. But this time it was different. It wasn't the decaying, abandoned structure I had seen before. It was whole, untouched, as if time had reversed itself. The door stood open, inviting me in. I wanted to turn away, to run, but my legs moved on their own, drawn toward the cabin, as if it were the only thing that mattered. My hands trembled as I stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of wood and earth. The walls were bare now, no symbols, no markings, just the silence. And yet, I could feel it, the weight of the forest pressing in on me from all sides. The journal was there, sitting on the floor in the center of the room, open to a page I hadn't seen before. I hesitated, but something in me urged me forward, and I reached for it. The words were different this time. The handwriting was smoother, more controlled. It was as if someone else had written it, someone who knew what was coming. You think you've escaped, but you never truly leave. The forest is not a place, it is a part of you. And once it has claimed you, it will never let go. I slammed the journal shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing thick with the same oppressive presence that had followed me through the woods. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was speaking to me. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was nothing there. The room was empty. The door was still open, the clearing outside still bathed in the same dim light. But the presence was there, in the air, in the very space I occupied. I wasn't alone, and I never would be again. The figure stepped into the room, its tall, thin form emerging from the shadows. Its ember eyes burned with a terrible hunger, its form shifting like smoke in the dim light. It didn't speak, didn't need to. I could feel its intent, its desire to consume, to take everything I had left. I backed away, my legs shaking, but I couldn't escape. The figure was everywhere now, filling the room, the air, the very ground beneath me. It was part of the forest, part of me, and I knew, in that moment, that the forest had never truly let me go. It had always been waiting for me to return. And now I was home,